Can stories make us better human beings? I've always believed that they can. When we enter the lives of others, see the world through their eyes, we develop empathy and perhaps even compassion. The more we experience the world through stories, the more we can transcend our own limited experience and understand how human beings everywhere are bound by the same emotions and values. And what about storytelling? When you tell a story through the eyes of someone else, do you become that other person in the course of the telling? Does every story that you tell change you in subtle ways? And what about conversation? When you enter a conversation with someone, a genuine conversation in which you trust the person you're speaking to and in which you listen, really listen to them, opening yourself out to them, does that change you as well? Should we cherish every form that can take us outside of ourselves?
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Verma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guest today is Nilesh Mishra, the storyteller and conversationalist I have admired for a long time. Nilesh started off in journalism in the 1990s, even wrote a few books, and then became a radio legend as a storyteller. Many of his stories set in the now mythical town of the Yaad Sheher. These stories about common people in common situations struck a chord across India, and soon many people were contributing stories they had written to his show. And a remarkable community of listeners and storytellers emerged from there. He also launched India's biggest rural media platform, Gaon Connection, and pioneered what he calls a slow movement. I'll provide links to all of these in the show notes. He also hosts a brilliant interview show on YouTube called The Slow Interview, which shares my personal ethic of letting a conversation breathe and spread out and digress. I was keen to have Nilesh on my show to discuss both storytelling and the art of conversation, and I was delighted when he agreed. Before we get to the conversation though, let's take a quick commercial break. How would you like to start your own podcast? Since you're listening to The Seen and the Unseen, I don't need to sell you on the power of podcasting. Audio is a unique medium, different from any other, and it allows for a level of depth and engagement that no other form does. You've no doubt experienced this in the long-form conversations that I've had here, but even for storytellers, this is the most exciting medium. And the best part of it all is anyone can start a podcast. You are limited only by your imagination and desire. And I want to help you by sharing my insights with you. I've just launched an online course called The Art of Podcasting, in which I will talk about what makes audio so unique, the different forms of storytelling that it enables, the art of the interview, and what will make your podcast stand out. I'll talk about these broader concepts as well as the nitty-gritties of what equipment to use, how to record, how to distribute, how to market your podcast and build your brand. My course consists of 3 webinars over 3 Sundays and costs rupees 10,000 plus GST or about $150. For more details and to sign up, head on over to seenunseen.in/learn. The art of podcasting at seenunseen.in/learn. Nilesh, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
Thank you.
Nilesh, when I first started my podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, before that, I wasn't someone who listened to much audio, frankly. I didn't really have a habit of radio. So I figured as a research, I should listen to some good podcasters and figure out what it's like. So someone recommended that you have to listen to Nilesh Mishra. And it was so intimidating because I thought, my God, this man has such an incredible voice. And, I heard your storytelling shows and it was just so engrossing and brilliant. And normally when I sort of research for an episode, I enjoy it. I have to read a bunch of books and all of that. And, it's good fun in its own way. But this was one of the most enjoyable episodes to research because I watched all your episodes of The Slow Interview, many of them many times, and absolutely loved it because conversation is so dear to my heart as well. And to see someone who is clearly a master of it was such a joy for me.
Thank you.
Let's kind of start, the way you often start, in fact, but by talking about your early life, talking about your childhood, where did you grow up? What was that like?
I was born in Lucknow, and at an early age, I went to Nainital. So I did much of my preschooling, etc. there. My father at that time was teaching geology. His field has been geology at the university. So I went to school there, and it was a new world because you're going to the hills, and there are definitely some sort of perceptions about outsiders, and there was this need to belong even as a child, and also because we were far away from home for the first time, missing Lucknow, but more than that, my Nanihal and my sort of the childhood here. And then I slowly adapted and started loving Nainital. And when I used to be in Lucknow, I used to say I'm from Nainital. And when I was in Nainital, I used to say I'm from Lucknow. So it was like a dual identity. And I think I learned a lot of things unknowingly in Nainital, which came in handy later in my career. Most important, everyday emotions, and those small emotions that I could feel, which perhaps if I had grown up in a big city or even a relatively smaller city like Lucknow, I would have missed out. Like one thing I remember is the sanctity of touch and spaces, individual spaces. So when I went to Delhi, for example, for the first time, and wasn't traveling in buses, standing, and fairly violated because I had come from a place where there was a space, there's personal space. So I went to this school called Bishop Shaw English Medium School. It was right by the lake, and a place called Talital. Nainital has Talital and Malital. Talital is the lower end of the lake, where we also used to live. And then after some time, I went to St. Joseph's College from class 5, which was one of the big sort of convent schools there. And Nasiruddin Shah, and there were a lot of illustrious people who were students. So it was very aspirational for my parents at the time, not us, because we didn't know that much. And I remember, and I have a twin brother. We are fraternal twins, not identical, Shailesh. So I remember that the session had started, and then we seemed to have missed out on the admissions when our neighbor, Mrs. Shah, who used to teach at a school called St. Mary's, they were like a brother and sister school. She told us about it, and then my father went and met the principal. And accidentally, he turned out to be from Newfoundland, Canada, where my father had done his research. And that's how it became a conversation starter, and we got in. And so I often look at these things about these beautiful coincidences of life. What if he was not from Newfoundland? Would my journey have been different? And there I was a shy, timid sort of a boy. But in class 7, I think for the first time I started to come into my own when the teacher one day said that he was choosing the class's debate team. There used to be an interclass competition. And I think on a whim, I raised my hand, and then we were supposed to read out something the next day, and I got selected. I mean, that, again, I feel it was one of the invisible turning points in my life, because I would have remained a very inward looking, very shy young person, but public speaking. And then we won the gold medal that year, and it just gave me a lot of confidence. Then I started to write for the college magazine, poems, etc. I've never narrated this story of mine. People keep saying that आपका भी slow interview होना चाहिए, but so it's good to remember a lot of things. And I was never good at sports. I was a day scholar, And that's a regret I think I had, because my classmates were, they were sports. They stayed back for sports. It was a huge British era, school with stone walls and big auditoriums and all that. So they stayed back for boxing and athletics and etc. And I think there was a feeling of उर्दू में शब्द होता है एहसास कमतरी, कम होने का एहसास. I think that would have been there in some way, because I had joined the school in class 5, and until class 7 I was fairly okay in academics, but I mean, like I would be like among the top 10 students, but not like, first top 3 or something. So the high of achievement, I would say, that was not there until I started public speaking. And that kind of filled up for the absence or the feeling of being inadequate in terms of achievements in some way, now that I look back. And that then set me off onto different things. I remember one of my classmates was Sajib Wazid, whose mother, Hasina Wazid, was the Prime Minister of Bangladesh later. Sajib and I used to compete in English and in sort of debates, etc., etc. It was a great time. It was multicultural. There was, of course, the day scholar border divide, and day scholars. I mean, the borders used to steal my lunch every day. They used to. There was not bullying as you would call it today, but definitely, I mean, because they were all from very rich families, and I was from an ordinary middle class family. So there was also that sort of, not an inferiority complex, but I was very aware of the fact that there was a gap. When school holidays started, their parents used to come in their big cars, and we used to hear of their big farms and etc. Somewhere all that was shaping who I was. And after class 10, the question was what to do next. And I, because St. Joseph's was only until class 10, and so I moved back to Lucknow. Again, a big shift, because I was from a very small town and I didn't even know how to ride a bicycle. I learned it after class 10. And then I had a grey bicycle which I used to ride to my school. My school was Mahanagar Boys. Even Mahanagar Boys, I mean, I got an admission because that same neighbor, Mrs. Shah, Mrs. Bhavna Shah, knew someone here, and the way it happens in middle class India. And when I came in, the first sort of thing that really bothered me was I had come from huge classrooms where the desks were like 5 feet apart, and there was you owned your space. And here there was no space. You just crammed together in small rooms, and it was hot, and it was just some other world. And then I came and realized that the school had no college magazine. So I wrote a long letter to the principal, Brother Mani, saying that I've come from a place where I was writing regularly for our school magazine, and we should have a school magazine. So he called me, and I think he found it very unusual that a boy would sort of. He was very feared, and he made me the student editor of the magazine. And so in some way, I mean, because I was disliking coming back and this new kind of school, which would have been a normal for a lot of people if they had grown up in the city, because cramped spaces, small classrooms, but it was not normal for me. So, but this maybe again brought me back to the creative space and to showcase some kind of achievement. So we started the school magazine, and at that time I started a very oddly named group, and I don't know, looking back, I don't know why I named it so. It was called the Shower Club, and I think I named it so because I thought it would be like a shower of ideas or something like some silly reason. So the idea was that to start, and I mean, looking back, to start something was brave, right? And I was never like the outgoing kind of type A personality that I later became in life. At that point, I was these small acts of becoming the captain of the debate team in class 7 or writing that letter to Brother Mani. Those were unusual, but I think it was beginning to. I was stepping out of my mental sort of cocoon, my threshold, and so I found that, and we like formed a hierarchy. I was the president, of course, and then there was a vice president and a treasurer. It was interesting, and then we said, okay, we will do a debate competition, an inter-college debate competition. So to me, it was great because I was doing something with public speaking. I was coming back to that and also kind of scaling it up. I mean, I didn't know this phrase then, but but for the other students, they would get to go to the girls' schools and get to meet girls and officially. So by now, the college management and the principal, etc., trusted me enough to say ki during school time, in my school dress, we used to go to other schools, to Loreto Convent, to there was an army public school here, to St. Francis, etc. So we organized a debate competition, and looking back, I don't know how I did it. It was the year when I think the some big anniversary of Jawaharlal Nehru was being organized, and the government was spending a lot of money to do a lot of cultural events. So someone told me this. One of my mama's friends said, "Ki, you're looking for a sponsor. Why don't you approach the cultural department to sponsor this debate competition?" So okay, well, we had a letter pad, proper saying shower club, and this was the typesetting era, so it was made at that time. So we went to the state secretariat, and looking back, I think it was really brave. So me in my school dress and my classmate Chandrasekhar Masiwal, who's now should be about to become a general in the Indian Army. So both of us went on our bicycles, and I don't know how, I don't know why they let us in, but they let us in. They made a pass for us, and then we went to the then Secretary for Culture. Is a gentleman called Atul Bagai, which was my first interface with an IS officer, with that world, with governance. It was fascinating. And he had a very peculiar habit. He had like a pile of papers in front of him. He would to sign, and he would sign and throw them behind him. So they went like flying in the air, and there were like 50 such papers, and somebody would come in later and collect them, and it was very cinematic. My first sort of view of the Indian bureaucracy was a very cinematic moment. And so we had this letter, which I'm assuming he found very cute. We had asked for 4,000 rupees to sponsor this competition, and so he signed it, and okay, and then but when we went to look for a venue, and I wanted it to be in a really nice venue, so I went to this hotel called Clark's Awadh, which was then like the best hotel in Lucknow, and they said we will charge you whatever, some 2-3,000 rupees per day. I hope I'm not sounding very old to your listeners by saying so. Which created a budget crunch. So now the budget was coming to 6,000. So what do? We went back to the same Atul Bagai, who smiled and he said, "Samosa kam kar lo na," because we had given an entire breakdown. The letter to the government said, "Itne samosa khilayenge, itna chai." We thought just the government, you have to give all the details. So that happened, and alongside, I had this fetish to start a magazine, which was again oddly called Shower. So the Shower, and this is the cyclo-style era. So I went up to my father one day, and he still remembers the story. And I said, I want to start a printing press. And he was a university professor, middle class family, never had anything to do with business, or never had a lot of money, or he found this very odd. And also, we lived in separate cities. I mean, he was still in Nainital, at the university, and I was here in Lucknow at my Nanihal. So when he came on, one of the holidays, I said, I want to start a printing. He said, why? I said, I want to print a magazine. So he said, well, go to another printing press and print it. So then there was I don't know, I'm looking back, maybe those were entrepreneurial skills in some way. Although I was never entrepreneurial in that sense. But so I went to one of a rich philanthropist called Mr. Gupta in Lucknow, who my mother knew through some satsang or somewhere. और उनको बड़ा कंजूस माना जाता था, वो कभी कुछ नहीं देते, और माय पेरेंट्स से वो 1 रुपया नहीं देंगे तुम्हें. So, and this is still a joke in my family. So I convinced him and I said, this is what I want to do. And he didn't give me money, but they had a paper mill or something. So he gave me paper, like a lot of paper. So that helped. And everybody said, like, wow, you got paper out of Mr. Gupta. I mean, he was a nice person, but obviously would want to see the ROI, term. I didn't know that. And so then how do we illustrate? It was exciting, and we took out a few issues. I wrote something, and some other contributors wrote. They used to send handwritten. And then I started taking subscriptions for the magazine. And the annual subscription, I think, was 20 rupees or 50 rupees, something like that. And I even conned my barber in Nainital into buying a subscription. He had a classic hair cutting salon. And what I did was I wrote a piece about him. And there used to be this magazine called Target Magazine at the time, published by India Today. My first poem was called A Fisherman's Song. It was published in Target Magazine. And I remember the day because I had written to the editor. I even remember her name. Rosalind Wilson was her name. And I was in Nainital, in this small town, and I had written this letter to the Living Media India office, F1415 Connaught Place. And I sent her, and then I got a letter from Rosalind Wilson saying, your typewritten letter on lovely paper, beautifully printed, saying that your poem has been published and it'll appear in the next. I was delighted. So every day, I think I was still in class 7. Every day I used to go to the Talital market from my home to the bookshop. Ki Target magazine aa gayi kya? And the moment it came, I saw my name and I rushed back home because I wanted to show it to my father. And I think that was the inspiration to do something like start a magazine of my own, and which was like mad, but whatever. But I had bought a subscription to Target, so I thought, acha, aise karte hain, to let me sell. So then I started regularly getting something or the other published in Target. And one piece that I wrote was a very funny story called The Barbarous Barber. And it was basically about my barber and how he like shook me up and champi kiya, ye kiya, wo kiya. And usme maine likha tha Classic Hair Cutting Salon. Now, Classic Hair Cutting Salon was an actual place where I used to go to, and that's why I borrowed my name. So Mahesh was the owner. So when I was selling subscriptions, I went back to Mahesh and said, look, तुम्हारी दुकान का मैंने ऐड किया यार, तुम सब्सक्रिप्शन तो खरीद सकते हो मेरा. He was thrilled. I mean, he didn't realize that I had made fun of someone like him who was like a part wrestler, part barber, that kind of thing. So he gave it, but we could never publish enough. So it happened for some time that some friend who's, यार तुम्हारी वो magazine कब आ रही है और वो पैसा दिया था मैंने. So I used to avoid many people, maybe about 20-30 people, because we were afraid that they would ask us for the subscription money or the magazine. And my brother Shailesh was also sort of party to this. And although he had no creative interest, he works for Adobe. He's a tech guy. So that's how, I mean, those little seeds of whether public speaking or kind of some writing, some publishing, those were happening. And then class 11, 12 after in Mahanagar Boys. And then I came back to Nainital to pursue graduation. Why this happened is an interesting story. So my father wanted me, like a lot of fathers of that time, to become a doctor. And I had zero interest in science. But because he wanted me to, and this was a prestigious school, Mahanagar Boys was one of the best schools in class 11 at the time. So I joined the biology stream, and I was hating it. And we used to have to cut frogs at that time, and you had to go to these shops of where you used to buy frogs, and I was terrified of seeing blood. Still am. And so it was just starting out, start of class 11, and I thought, like, ye kahan phas gaya main? So the first parent-teacher meeting happened, and our class teacher was Mrs. Vimla Mishra. Very tough, very, very stern. Everybody was really scared of her. Barely spoke, barely smiled. Very respected. So my father sat there, and Mrs. Mishra, and I think the meeting was in a science lab or somewhere. And in the first few minutes of that session, I said the unspeakable. Or I said, "Ma'am, मेरा कोई मन नहीं था साइंस लेने का, इन्होंने मुझे जबरदस्ती डाला है." And there was an awkward silence in the room. What does my father say? What does the teacher say? ओहो बेटा, ये तो बड़ा गड़बड़ हो गया, अब कैसे करें, अभी तो 2 साल पढ़ा है. My father, all this while, thought up his wily plan to tackle with this unprecedented situation. So as we left, he said, यार ऐसा करते हैं, एक शर्त लगाते हैं, अगर तुम्हारी इंटरमीडिएट में फर्स्ट डिवीजन आ गई तो जो तुम चाहोगे वो होगा, अदरवाइज जो मैं चाहूंगा वो होगा. Now in UP board, getting a first division was extremely tough. It is like the toughest board of the country. So it was a very wily trick that he had come up with, sitting there, which would make me study hard if I had to win the life I wanted. And there was biology, there was physics. It was an alien world for me. I did not relate to them. While all of my classmates were pursuing their dream careers, they wanted to be doctors and engineers, etc., etc. So I perforce studied hard, and I did get a first division. I think I got 74%, which would be considered very high at the time, although there were toppers. Like the UP topper would be from Mahanagar Boys. It was that kind of an institution. And then my father kept his word. So then I said that I want to study the arts. So each boy in my class wrote the CPMT exam to become a doctor. And I was the only one who didn't. And my father said, exam to de do. Mat karna. I think he was still clutching at straws. So I said, look, if I write the exam and get through, तब तो आप छोड़ोगे नहीं मुझे, तब तो डॉक्टर बनना पड़ेगा. And if I don't get through, I will live with a sense of defeat. So I didn't write the exam. I was the only boy in my class who did not write that exam. And then, of course, like I said, he kept his word. I went back to Nainital. I joined the BA course with history, political science, and literature. This was also, I think he had a thought, because now that I had given up on medicine, he wanted me to write the IS exam. And these 3 subjects seemed fit towards that journey. I topped my university. And that was a great time. We used to sing, with friends. There were competitions. I think I was gathering the moments that would later appear in my storytelling. I used to go for long walks along the lake. For the first time, I was experiencing female attention. That was also new. Because until this point, and I used to be very, very skinny growing up. So both my brother and I had a huge complex about it. We never wore t-shirts because we were like so thin. It was a big deal when I would have first started wearing t-shirts. I'm sure every skinny boy or girl would relate to it. But one interesting thing had happened alongside, which was that when I was in class, I think around class 12 or so, still in Lucknow, I used to, like I said, go by cycle to my school. And on the way, there is a big intersection called Burlington Choraha. So on Burlington Pe, there was the office of Swatantra Bharat and Pioneer, which were then big newspapers. Swatantra Bharat was huge, as big as Dainik Jagran today. It was like a household paper. And Pioneer had just kind of started, and it was also, with its modern design, it was also a new, refreshing sort of alternate to a Hindustan Times or Times of India. It was interesting. It was like what Asian Age was perceived as in Delhi when it came. So one day, I used to look at this building every day, and one day I mustered the courage and I went into that building. And I walked up to the person the first person I saw, who had a thick beard, and he was sitting and with his head towards the table. And as luck would have it, he was the features editor, called Ravi Verma. Deep voice. And again, I had gone in my school uniform. So it was an unusual sight for him to see a boy in a school uniform come up. And he said, Ji. So I said, मैं अखबार में लिखना चाहता हूँ. So he looked at me top to bottom and he said, बैठिए. And maybe boys in small towns at that time didn't do these things, didn't go up, didn't start magazines, didn't go up to the features editor, etc. And he asked me to write a piece. At the same time, I went in to meet the editor of the Pioneer. It was the first time I had met a newspaper editor-in-chief. And I had written something, and he said, okay, where's the story? So I was quite offended because he had called it a story. I didn't know that a news story is called a story. I thought he's calling it fiction. I said, it's not a story, it's news. So, which he found endearing. And but then when he saw it, he said, well, if you want to come work for us someday, come back after you finish school. So then I started writing regularly for both of them, and that's how I was starting to earn. My first earnings started. And the first thing I bought was Philips, like it had these twin cassette recorders. So you started one, and then it would stop and the other one would play. A lot of your listeners will not know what we're talking about.
I think it was called a double deck, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
It was called a double decker. It was a big deal to get it. So it was an aspirational piece for me. So, and I saved money. I used to get about 400-500 rupees per piece. My first piece was Sunday magazine front page full story. So it was a good debut, and then I got spoiled. I only wrote cover stories for them, and I think because I didn't know journalism or I didn't know feature writing, I didn't know how to write a piece. I was doing it in my own way. This was the time of the first Iraq war in Kuwait. And looking back, this has been my strength in anything I've undertaken, which is I have no baggage of convention. I don't know how things are done. So when I start doing something which is new, I don't know how it's done, so I do it my way. So I didn't know how articles are written. So I was writing like there was a piece on snowfall, on a snowfall in Nainital, and first person piece. There was my first piece, I think, and I was telling Chang the other day on my show, this Slow Cafe. It was about Indian Chinese, the community dentists and in the beauty business, etc. So it was interesting that I was starting to go to, and the act of reporting is not an easy act. You go to somebody, you have them evoke enough trust in you to open up, and you listen to them carefully. So a lot of the things that came in handy later in my career, I became a good listener. I think I'm a damn good listener, where I'm genuinely interested in the other person. And all this started at that time. So my mother one day said ki, she had a favorite tailor called Akram, and who had vanished because he went away to Kuwait. And one day she said, Akram वापस आ गया. She was very delighted. क्या हो गया? So we linked back that I went up to Ravi Verma and I said, I want to do a story on Indians who are returning after the. And so this was very unusual for him and something that his own reporters had not thought of. So to be able to, we were getting like a human face of a top international story, which was in the news at the time. So I did that and these many other. So I saved money. So about, I think 8,000 or something is what the double decker cost me at the time, 8 or 10,000. And I used to listen to Jagjit Singh ghazals and Ghulam Ali ghazals, and me and my father were living alone in Nainital at the time. My mother was looking after our village school, and my brother had was in Lucknow, and he had chosen to be here. So, yeah, I think that's a very long answer to your short question.
No, it's a delightful answer, and there are many strands I want to unpack and ask you about. No, I was, I'm born in the same year as you, a few
Right.
months later. So a lot of what you were saying made me nostalgic in a different way. I mean, obviously, I wasn't in Nainital, but I was a day scholar in a school which had a lot of borders in Pune, the Bishop School,
Right.
and otherwise, and another thing that sort of struck me about what you were saying was your memory for these small details. And I just realized that I might not remember what happened last week so clearly. But, when you talk of writing, posting a letter to F14, F15, Connaught Place and all of that, it's just, I can see why those would kind of stick out in your mind. Now, a bunch of questions, I'll go through them one by one. One is, I heard rather I think you were interviewing Warren Grover. I think it was in that one where or I forget which one it was, but you mentioned how thin you were, and that also struck a chord because something that I often tell people, which they can't believe looking at me now, is that I was so thin in college that I didn't like wearing t-shirts.
Right.
In fact, my quip about that is I would step out of my hostel, and if I was wearing a t-shirt, I would not want the wind to blow against me because you could count my ribs.
Yeah.
So depending on which way the wind was blowing, I would go either to the tapri or to the canteen. But living, and I was quite sort of moved by your story about, how when, boarders used to take your tiffin, you've mentioned in another of your conversations, that in a sense, you felt good that, you're having the same food as them, that kind of sense of fitting in and belonging in a sense. And I realized that, one of the early anxieties that we have as people that we never quite lose, that is very hard to lose. I think I probably, managed to control it in my middle age, is that anxiety of what other people think of you, that desire for validation, and you want to fit in and you want to be part of the crowd. And I mean, I kind of totally get that at the same level. And so it was interesting to me that all of these things that you did, whether it was, the debating in school, or whether it was, sort of taking the initiative to start a magazine in your next school when you went to Lucknow and all of that, do you think that this, your artistic expression and your ways of doing that, now obviously I'm sure you loved writing and you loved debating and all of that, and you were just being true to yourself, but at the same time, was all of that also a way of fitting in? And a larger question is that, at what point did you sort of, I know you're a very self-reflective man. That's very obvious from the conversations you have. At what point did you become aware of this kind of anxiety and begin to become comfortable in your own skin and sort of, coming to terms with all of that?
I think when I was in school in St. Joseph's, there was this feeling of being an outsider, because in Nainital itself, there was the feeling of being an outsider. वहाँ पे वो पहाड़ी देसी ये terms चलती हैं. I have a lot of amazing local friends, and I mean, I sort of, like I said, I'm half Pahari. I count myself as half Pahari, but maybe that's where this thing started of trying to fit in. If I had grown up in Lucknow, it would be different. I probably would be a different person. And then school, where boarders were definitely a notch higher than day scholars, which was very clear in the school hierarchy. Plus, they were very well-to-do, well-off boarders. So, being aware that you're not as prosperous as them, and but the equalizers were small. Being the captain of the debating team and winning the gold was one equalizer. Starting that club, because even when I came here, all my classmates were from very rich families. They would have a scooter, and there were no cars then, but they would have that gray Yamaha bike, and those were the signs of you know being rich at the time for a student. When I started doing new things or taking initiatives, maybe it was my defense, maybe it was a way to stand out, make a mark, to sort of go against the current. Looking back, I seriously don't know where that courage came from, because it would have required courage. I was in a school in Lucknow where the only thing valued was studies, because they were all potential toppers in the state, and they were all. It was a school of very intelligent students, and I was not like a very intelligent student as academics go. So maybe that was my way of standing out. But what it did was that, and again, I'm analyzing that now today because you asked me this, that maybe those little milestones, those little successes gradually transformed me from being a person who's trying to fit in to a person who's doing small innovations to lead in some way. And how would a boy in class 11 have the courage to go into the imposing state secretariat building, to even walk in, to even get that pass made? I don't know. It surprises me looking back. But after that time, when I saw that my ideas were sort of elbowing their way, that the school principal would suddenly feel good because something I did, I would go to debate competitions in other schools and we would win. And then at the school assembly, he would honor me, sort of. This was new. This was quite amazing. So I think in doing these things, it was emboldening me in some way for, to do new things. And maybe that is what gave me the courage later in life to do even far more risky things or far more crazy things. And if I had followed the safe route, the correct route, if I had given that medical examination, my life would be different. I would be different. So maybe these were the little. I was chipping away at my own destiny, at what was to be the destiny of this regular, ordinary, middle class boy with medium level grades. But hey, here were these 2-3 things which I could also do, and then that made me stand out in some way.
No, and it's you mentioned the word destiny, and it also strikes me as how contingent the direction our life takes can often become on little things, like you pointed out, going to Nainital, and I guess it's also resonant to me that you would tell your Lucknow friends that you're from Nainital and vice versa, because you're a different person then, just because made that shift, and that's so fascinating to me. Another thing that sort of struck me about your background, which is very interesting, is your father's idealism, in a sense, that he studied in Newfoundland in Canada, but he wants to give something back to his society. And he actually, I was looking him up on Wikipedia and elsewhere, and he's noted for fossil discoveries. And even in that young career, he had, already started making a mark. But he decides he wants to give back to society, and he comes back to this village near Lucknow and, looks after the school and runs the school. And did some of that idealism rub off on you, in the sense that I know that when we are growing up, everything about our parents is normal. Even if they are extraordinary, we won't think of it as extraordinary. So did sort of, and this is also like what your father did, this act of great idealism, saying that, I will not do the supposedly conventional, sensible thing in making a career. I will come back and do this. Also seems at odds, in a sense, with his personality as a father when he's telling you, nahi beta medical karo, or nahi beta IAS karo, and all of that. So one, was there an awareness of this, and was this sense of, the fact that, your father himself was so principled,
Yeah.
was there an awareness of that, and did that then also in some way of osmosis or whatever rub off on the way you approached your life?
For sure. And like you said, when we're growing up, we don't realize any of this. But my childhood was, I used to be in Nainital. My mother, like I said, was in Lucknow. And what were their conversations when they spoke to each other on the phone, which was at our landlord's place? They were not romantic conversations. They were about वो ट्रक आ रहा था ईटा का वो रुक गया है वहां पे अच्छा वो फलाना वो वजीफा आया है. It was shop talk. It was just everything was about the school. And I was addressing students recently at our village school, and I said that हमारा थोड़ा खिसका हुआ परिवार है. We're just nuts. This is not an ordinary family, because our conversations, even our family group, like me, my parents, and my brother, it's named after the school, like what next for BGV or something like that. So I grew up, the uncertainties were how to run the school. I used to listen in. We used to go spend time there in the village whenever we could. I remember falling sick and I had high fever because dacoits had attacked a hut 2 homes away. So it was a very different kind of life. It was while we were city boys, but we were acutely aware of our rural connection, and it was normalized. So there was no looking down on rural India, in a way. And later, now that I look back, me pursuing my journey in journalism, then going to Bombay, and then giving it all up and coming back to Lucknow, and then even that now living, mostly in my village, is the same kind of return that my father did from Canada. Because when I gave up my life in Bombay, I was not following any script. I was not following a journey. I was not saying, oh, I'm inspired by my father. I just did it, without thinking. But looking back, yes, I gave up a lot of things when I returned from Bombay as my career there in the films was kind of taking off. I was meeting top directors and top composers, etc. So yeah, I think somewhere definitely there was this osmosis for sure.
And was your father proud when you bought that double deck and, with the money that you'd earned doing your, freelance journalism and all that?
Yeah, I could see that he was proud that I was that in college people would know me, that his fellow teachers would talk about me. That was new. And by this time, to give him credit, so I've written a story called Papa Se Shart, which what happened was in the season 1 of my show, a lot of students from Kota, there's a huge listenership for my show in Kota. So they used to say that we are very stressed. Can you please narrate a story from your life, which is uplifting? So I said, well, there's hardly anything uplifting in that sense, but yeah, there's this story. So I wrote a story called Papa Se Shart, which was about that bet, which my father lost. And then at the end, I had my father on the phone, and he says that I'm really happy that I lost that bet. And I would ask all parents to not force their ambitions on their children. So it was very, interesting, because so by this time he had realized that this was my calling, that was an alien world for me. I was really enjoying. I was coming into my own in the arts and getting recognition. And then he used to say कि ये अपना कमा खाएगा, ये भूखा नहीं मरेगा, ये पागलपंती की चीजें करेगा, but he'll make his way, is what sort of he used to tell. So I think my maverick ways and my unusual, unorthodox ways is something that by that time he was quite comfortable with. And he never stopped me from anything in my life after that. I never had to make any decisions keeping his desires in mind, because he never expressed or imposed desires of any kind.
Perfect. Let's take a quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we'll go down the rest of your journey.
All right.
Are you one of those people who not only loves to read but also wants to write better? If so, I have something for you. Since April this year, I've been teaching an online course called The Art of Clear Writing. 4 webinars spread out over 4 Saturdays in which I share whatever I've learned about the craft and practice of writing over 25 years as a professional writer. The course also contains many writing exercises, discussions on email and WhatsApp, and much interactivity. It costs rupees 10,000 or $150. You can check out the details at indiauncut.com/clear writing. This link will be in the show notes. If you want to bridge the gap between the thoughts in your head and the words on the page, then the art of clear writing might be just what you need. November batches begin on Saturday, November 7th, so hurry and register before then. indiauncut.com/clear writing. Welcome back to The Scene and the Unseen. I'm chatting with Nilesh Mishra. You could say I'm doing a slow interview of Nilesh Mishra, if I may be audacious enough to say something like that. So Nilesh, where we left off on your sort of journey, and besides your journey, of course, I'll have a lot of broader questions which we'll explore as we go through this conversation. But where we left off on the journey was, you're in Nainital, you're in college, you're writing for the Pioneer, and so on. And from there, how do you sort of move on and become a full-time journalist? How do you kind of get into that career? And is that what you wanted to do? Like your conception of what I want to do in life, was that more to just a general thing of being an artist and, the journalism just came along and it seemed to make sense? Or, did you specifically, think about journalism and get excited about it?
No, I never wanted to become a journalist, and I never had a very good view of journalists. I used to call them magnified stenographers, is the phrase I used to use at that time. So what happened was that I did my graduation and then came to Delhi, which was a new chapter in my life. I had been only once to Delhi when I came to meet the same Rosalind Wilson who wrote me that letter. So I had come to Connaught Place to meet her. But apart from that, I'd never sort of spent any time, and the huge roads. It was a completely different world for me. And I stayed as a paying guest for about a year while I was preparing for my IS preliminary exam. And I used to get these brilliant tutorials, these big packets that came. And 2 or 3 days before the exam, I started getting some very excruciating pain in my ears. And it didn't go away, and I wrote my exam like that. And I didn't get through. And my father said, "अरे नहीं वो कान में दर्द हो गया था इसलिए तुम्हारा IAS में नहीं हुआ." मैंने कहा नहीं ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, मेरा नहीं हुआ IAS क्योंकि मैं नहीं क्लियर कर पाया. And thank God I didn't get through. Now when I talk to young people, I always tell them about my failures.
Did you want to get through?
No. In fact, I didn't even know what it entailed. Because I was from Nainital. I had heard that Delhi boys do this thing called TOEFL and SAT, and how they go to study abroad. And I used to feel quite awful that I didn't know how to do it, where to apply, what to do. And the same was there for IAS, that I didn't know what happens when is it the name of a job? What is it? So I wrote that exam. Of course, during that year, I understood what it is, but it wasn't really a life of my choosing. But then there was no alternate life to be seen. And I didn't know then that a career could be made out of creativity. It had to be that thing you do on the side, as it is for millions of people. So I didn't get through, and then I was devastated because I'd studied a whole year for it. Then I wrote the international relations exam in JNU, and I didn't get through. And thank God I didn't. And at that time, when I was at a low, my lowest ever in life, because I had come from Nainital and spent money and let down my parents. In my view, they never said it so, but that's how I saw it. So I joined French classes in Bharati Vidya Bhavan as something I was doing on the side while I was figuring out what to do next. And after the classes, I used to go to Janpat, where there were these 2 or 3 shops which used to sell cheese sandwiches. And because, like every other student, my eating habits were all over the place. There was no fixed time. So that used to be like my lunch at whatever time of the day. And that's when one day I saw a boy coming towards me who I realized was my classmate called Gaurav Agrawal, classmate from Mahanagar Boys from class 11, 12. And then we got talking, we met, we were both living then in Noida, and he said he had 2 forms for the Indian Institute of Mass Communication. And I said, I don't want to become a journalist. I think journalists are lousy. They're magnified stenographers. He said, लाया हूं form, ले लो तुम, कर दो. So I wrote that exam, and he didn't get through. I got through. I mean, again, मेरी जो जिंदगी है ना वो खूबसूरत इत्तेफाकों से भरी पड़ी है. Beautiful coincidences. What if I had not seen Gaurav Agrawal at that moment, having sandwich at that place, whatever, Deep Paul's or something it was called.
I used to love the cold coffee at Deep Paul's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Delhi at that time as well for a brief while, for a year.
Right. And so I got in, I remember I was then in Nainital, I got this brown government letter, a brown envelope, like an official letter, which said that I had made it. And after these 2 big setbacks, not making it to the IS and then the JNU, this is something that salvaged some amount of pride at a difficult time. So I went, and when I went, so I was not sure because there were, 50% seats were reserved. Of the remaining, we knew that a lot of pushes and pulls happen, calls from the information broadcasting ministry, this seat, that seat. So there were 36 seats in all. And of that, there were like 6 or 7 seats nationally that we were competing for. So according to statistically, it was almost as tough as making it to the IS. So I was very nervous also because I didn't want to fail this one more time, and everything depended on the interview. And when I came for the interview, I had like my weapon, which was all the articles I had written for Ravi Verma since class 11. When I was studying for the IS in Delhi, I had been writing for Mainstream, that magazine that used to come out at that time. So I had a big sort of thick bundle of things I had written. And I was confident that अगर यहाँ बेमानी नहीं होती तो मुझे कोई रोक नहीं सकता है. That's what I told myself as I walked into that room. And it was a good interview. I was happy. And some days later, I was told that I was in. I learned pretty much nothing at IMC. And I was in the print journalism. Later, they invited me as a guest lecturer after some time. And I went back and I very tactlessly said this to the director's face, that यहाँ मैंने कुछ सीखा नहीं. It was a very cinematic moment. They used to give these checks of 500 to 1,000 rupees. The registrar was slipping her hand, sliding the envelope towards me. When I said the sentence, यहाँ कुछ नहीं होता, the hand stopped in the middle of the table. A very awkward moment again. Once more, something very interesting happened, which was that when the course was about to end, our professor, Professor M.R. Dua, was lining up internships for everybody, which was compulsory. So I went up to my professor and I said, "Sir, आप मेरे लिए internship मत ढूंढिएगा." This was a very subversive thing to say, because all other students were dependent on Professor Dua to find them internships. And there was this chit of a boy coming and saying, "Don't look for it." So I was confident that I would find it on my own. And in the phone directory, I found the number for Reuters. And Reuters was at One Kautilya Marg in Delhi's diplomatic enclave. And I reached out to this burly 7-foot Irish bureau chief, as I later discovered, Paul Iredale. And Paul gave me a date to come and meet him, and a time which I did not understand because I didn't understand his accent. So I went at some other time to meet him, and he was waiting and he was very upset. So I said, "I'm really sorry," and da-da-da. And again, that whole bunch of clippings and everything, and I had taken. And so anyway, he gave me the internship. And he told me to join on the 1st of April. I started my career on the first on Fool's Day. And as it turned out, when the final exam roster came, that the last paper was on the 1st of April, which was broadcast journalism. Now, I had no courage to go back to that 7-foot Paul Iredale, whose accent I didn't understand, and to explain to him once again that, this has happened. Can you move that meeting to whatever, just the next day? And secondly, I thought to myself, and I remember it was very, very logical thinking. I said, look, why did I do this IMC course? I did it for practical knowledge and a job. Where is my likelihood greater of getting a job? Is it by writing that exam, or is it by doing this internship? Because at least I'm getting to show what I know. There's a greater likelihood of them hiring me, right? So do I want that piece of paper? No, I don't want that piece of paper. So I was the only boy once again in my class. Like in class 12, I had not written the CPMT exam for medical. I was again the only boy to not write this exam. And everybody said, "You're nuts. Why did you study all this while?" I said, "Well, I can't give up this internship." And then I did the internship, and then I got my first job at India Abroad, which was this expatriate paper for... It then used to have an edition in London also, apart from US editions. And a lot of my friends who joined other places, they looked at me as this, fool, like what had I done. Then they had their convocation, and they took pictures in their black hats, and of course I was not there, so that, I was not getting any degree, and they said, "Well, we missed you, and how foolish of you to do this." But 2 to 3 years later, I got a call from IMC, and they said, "Well, we wanted to give you that degree." And I said, "I'm not going to write any exam." He said, "No, don't write any exam." But I don't know why they called. It was out of the blue. Out of the blue, that same professor called, Dr. Raghav Chari. And I said, "Sir, I can't write any exam." So he said, "No, mere ko tum file ke liye kuch de do, some newspaper article, something or the other, just give it to me." So I gave it, and they gave my degree. Finally, it added up. And then at India Abroad, I started my journey. But now I started liking journalism, because this was a different kind of journalism. It was, if I had not interned at Reuters, for example, if it was somewhere else, my distaste for journalism would have continued. But I was really enjoying it. And I had amazing, one of my seniors there was Narayanan Madhavan. So Gurudev hai hamare wo. Or so there were a couple of others. Rahul Sharma, who is now a dear friend. He was the Deputy Director General of FICCI until recently, and Editor-in-Chief of Khaleej Times. So I learned a lot. I was like the youngest there by many, many years. I learned a lot at Reuters, and the same at India Abroad, because they were also writing for an international audience. So the storytelling, the craft, all of that was like really good. And So, and because I was the youngest and everybody else was senior, there was a gentleman called K.S. Nair, amazing, amazing person, a guru to me, who was there, and he lives in Kerala, back home now. Tarun Basu, of course, was my first boss. KPK Kuti, who was earlier the editor-in-chief of UNI, he was there. So all the running around assignments I started doing. So, and there was so much happening at the time. My first sort of outstation assignment was the mid-air collision, Charki Dadri. And I remember, and I was getting very little money. So I was living in like a servant quarter, like this little room outside. I remember getting a call at that point and rushing to Charki Dadri in the night, middle of the night, and walking in this field where there was this debris on one side and walking over limbs that were dismembered, etc., etc. It kind of catapulted me into another universe completely, because it was like being thrown into the deep end. It was not like you reported on the municipal corporation and a little bit of this beat and that beat, and finally I was given like the biggest assignment right away. It was the top global story, and I was doing it. Narasimha Rao was being tried at that time in the Hawala case. Saint Kitts trial was happening. Bofors trial was happening. Chandra Swamy. I mean, these names that we were heard were right there before our eyes. Narasimha Rao would be sitting there. Chandra Swamy would be sitting there. It was so I grew very fast as a journalist in my head, because it involved very, very responsible journalism. I couldn't go wrong on anything. And I started really loving my job, and the fact that there was no beat, the fact that it was about the long form, it was about storytelling. And so I worked at India Abroad for 3 years, and then I was looking around for a job, and many places I went to, they said, we love your work. We don't have a position. The position that we have is kind of beneath you. It's like maybe an intern or some. And now I wonder, for example, I had gone to Time magazine. Tim McGurk used to be there, and BBC, William Woodridge was there. And they all said, we love this. We love your work, but we don't have a full-time position. And what if I had taken that stringer position at Time magazine? I would have gotten confirmed in a few years, right, and become full time, and then who knows where in the world I would be, or join the BBC, or so. I mean, again, paths that I did not take, which I could easily have taken, which would have paid me more than I was getting at the time, and etc. So at that time, I went to the AP, the Associated Press, and when I went there, they made me write an exam. I remember my news editor was Donna Bryson, a very, very warm, affectionate African American lady, such an amazing, amazing woman. And I wrote not an exam, she just gave me a story to edit, and I edited it. And she said, well, I don't know what to say. It's like ready to go. You just got the style right. Because I was already writing for an overseas audience. So I was getting all the background and context, everything. So I started working at the AP, and immediately what happens is the nuclear test. This is 1995. Vajpayee government, nuclear tests. And now firstly I started long form, and now I'm in the business of like immediate journalism of immediacy, and this is way before breaking news, what we have by way of breaking news today, but we were competing against AFP and Reuters for minutes every day. And now I look back and laugh at it. I mean, nobody gave a damn about who reported what 1 minute in advance, but 1 minute would be like a lifetime. And there used to be this little chart, a long chart actually, that used to come every day from our Asia office and then from the New York office about who had so many stories published in which paper. So there'd be like a score every day. So on tsunami story, it'll be 15, 6, 5. So AP, Reuters, AFP. Every day we used to see that score and feel good or bad, etc. And then the super cyclone happened in Odisha, and I was sent there, and again, coming face to face with death, with destruction, all these very, very powerful human emotions that I was experiencing very early on in my career. That shaped who I was going to be as a communicator. And I was in Orissa for a few months, couple of months at least, because that was the thing with the agency people. You go in first and you get out last. Then the Kargil war happened. So I think I got the dates wrong earlier. So 95 is when I joined India Abroad, and 99 is when I joined the Associated Press. So the Kargil war happens, and 98 is when I joined. That's when the nuclear test took place. And the next year, the Kargil war happens. I'm there. When I'm about to go, I get chicken pox. And I'm like really devastated because I badly wanted to go. So my departure is delayed by about 15, 20 days. My colleague, Hema Shukla, who now lives in the US, she went and I sort of replaced her. And again, life changing for the first time in a battlefield, so close, there's shelling happening. You don't realize that you're so close to life and death situations. And you see the army at work for the first time, understand sort of life from their point of view. All those assignments were a great training in life for me, and as a person, a person who developed great empathy because of those experiences. And I covered Kashmir extensively. I covered insurgency very extensively, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, the Northeast. So I was able to now start seeing the world from the point of view of others. And that's something that I have never let go of. I can, I remember interviewing this Pakistani Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist who was arrested for bombing something, and where someone had died. And he was 25 years old, I remember. And he was from Bahawalpur, the same town as Masood Azhar. And I interviewed him for 2 hours, and then I said, मैं आपके रास्ते से इत्तेफाक नहीं रखता, लेकिन आपके convictions, जो भी मैंने शब्द यूज किया, की कदर करता हूँ. So I could see the world from his point of view. I could see why he did what he did. I didn't agree with what he did, but I could see why he did it. And I could see how he got there. And I think since that time, I have managed to hold on to this, whatever few skills I have. But this definitely skill I have is that I have a great sense of proportion. I can not like something someone says, but still like that person. And I can make that difference. And that is often challenged on social media because, like I recently tweeted, I unfollowed or muted a lot of people because of what they were on social media. But I like who they are in real life. And I want to continue liking them as they are. But when they come onto Twitter, they become other people. So I don't want to engage with that version of them. So I think I'm able to make that difference. And all this, looking back and now trying to make sense of it, I learned at that time during the earlier phase. But I was able to look at the world from other points of view. And that's a valuable lesson to learn, which is extremely handy in today's time when we are so angry, so outraged, and we want to become outraged. We seem to be looking for things to be outraged about all the time. Yesterday my daughter Vaidehi, who's 5, so she often becomes upset for no reason, and she'll sit in a corner grumpy, and I was telling my wife, I said, she's getting upset over nothing. She should be on Twitter. So yeah, that's how. And I, as a journalist, I learned storytelling. I did the biggest possible assignments for the AP. I was doing the tsunami happened. I was in the Andamans for a couple of months. I covered earthquakes, floods. All kinds of natural disasters, which meant that I came face to face with a lot of human misery and human pain and resilience. I mean, I remember when the tsunami happened and they were doing a survey of the Nicobarese tribe. They were doing assessing loss for everybody, and people had to list their losses, and people from the quote unquote mainland listed, we lost this house and this radio and this TV and da da da. And the Nicobaris listed, well, I lost three of my pigs and two of my cows, and that's all that mattered to them. The homes didn't, the huts didn't, etc. And also, I realized that they don't have a word for orphan in their language because nobody's orphan. The community takes over. The community takes care of them. So there's no word for orphan in the Nicobarese language. So it was a fascinating time, and I still love journalism. I'm an old-fashioned journalist. I miss being a reporter, and I'm very. I mean, it's become a joke now in my office कि मुझे reporting करनी है. So, sir, आप 5 साल से बोल रहे हो. So, becoming an entrepreneur has come with huge sacrifices. But I want to be a Gaon Connection reporter, not its founder. I want to write stories for my show, not be the storyteller. So, yeah, I know I'm rambling, I think.
No, I mean, that's fascinating, and that's what I kind of love about my show, when I can get people to ramble. I remember when, the tsunami happened, I traveled down the coast of Tamil Nadu around that time, and I was in fact blogging regularly during that. And one of the interesting things I remembered is, and it took a while to put the pieces together, is that as we would go along the coast at different villages, people showed us watches and clocks that had stopped when the waters came in.
Yes.
And they had stopped at different times. And you could actually make out through your journey how the water came in just by the stop times on the clock. And that kind of strikes me as, I remember blogging about that. And today, just as as you mentioned that you were there, it strikes me as just a kind of concrete thing that you would remember and put in your stories. And we'll come to your storytelling later, which I'm a big fan of as well. Before we get there, I had a question, which is that, young people today often take it for granted that, look, we have the world at our fingertips. So I can go online and all of journalism is there, all of storytelling is there, kuch bhi music hai. Like you said, back in the double deck days, it used to be so much hard work to get a mixtape made of something that it was almost an achievement. And today everything is there at the fingertips. And it also strikes me then that for people of our generation, privileged as we were, but for people of our generation, still the world was largely closed. There wasn't an internet. And a question that often strikes me is the question of how are we formed? Like in terms of your journalistic values and aesthetics, like you pointed out, working at Reuters obviously helped because that sense of values, which is there at a top class organization, is percolating down and you're continuing with it in India, abroad, and of course, AP. But in a sense of storytelling, how does that sort of work out? Because I can kind of look back at my past and say that, okay, these are the kind of books that I liked growing up, and this is sort of what has shaped my aesthetic values and so on. And obviously today a kid growing up has the best of world cinema and the best of Bollywood, and a kid in Bombay would also have the best of Tamil cinema and Malayalam cinema, which otherwise back in the day there would be no access to even that. What was that sort of process like of forming your taste and coming to a sense of, this is who I am, this is what I like, this is the kind of work I want to do?
One of my shortcomings is that I've not watched a lot of films. I've not read a lot of books, but I've met a lot of people. And I often say this, that I don't have a lot of knowledge, but I have a lot of experience. And that comes from the experience of others and the ability to listen to them and live their experience. And if I was doing journalism in an Indian newspaper, I know that kind of storytelling would not have its place. The kind of long form that I would do on a regular basis. It was not a luxury. I would do it on a regular basis because you were explaining your stories to an international audience. And the point was that how would an ignorant American reader who didn't give a damn about India how would you get him or her interested? Used to be what, our bosses used to tell us. And because I was at India Abroad earlier anyway, I was so writing for the foreign audience might seem to some like you were dumbing down things, like you were saying the northern state of Uttar Pradesh and things like that. But to me, it was an opportunity to bring a lot of storytelling into my writing. And I used to challenge myself because I didn't want to become predictable in the way I wrote my intro, the way I structured a story. Was I becoming repetitive? Was I becoming boring? So it's like a challenge you throw at yourself. How do you open a story? How do you find 10 different ways to open the same story? And I used to love that. Of course, being in an agency, often our bylines were not published. It would just say AP. Or when I was at India Abroad in India, they were going to as IANS, which was then India Abroad News Service, now Indo-Asian News Service. So that some amount of anonymity was there. So in that sense, you were not doing it for fame. If I was, today's journalism, and I say this so much that it's become like a cliche to myself also. Today, a lot of journalists seem to believe that they're not covering the news, they are the news. And I come from a time when the anonymity that we had gave us the humility that we had, and which is extremely crucial. You had to earn your byline. It was not a given. If your subscriber in the US or Europe liked your story like really good, they would retain your byline or not. And suddenly you would get this big bunch where your bylines would be in the Washington Post or the Philadelphia Inquirer or some other paper. And I find I think our generation was extremely uniquely placed, and because we've seen both the AD and the BC. We've seen the arrival of the internet, for God's sake. That's a path-breaking moment in our lives. But we've also seen what happened before that. So we carry the right amount of nostalgia and the right amount of modernity among us, which is a deadly combination. Nobody else can match it. Nobody who came before us or after us can match what we have. It's a beautiful mix. We are that test tube which will never get these two chemicals together. We've seen that television that opened with the creak, loud sound, that wooden shutter. We've paid ₹1 and ₹1.5 per song to get our, cassettes filled with the songs we love. We have seen that time before air conditioners, before coolers, and been fine with it. We've heard that ugly sound of dial-up, which would come at the end with this rough sound, which was the most beautiful sound in the world, because we were connected to the internet and would get you to our Yahoo Mail or our Yahoo search or whatever. And here we are in the world that is now already experiencing artificial intelligence and virtual reality and augmented reality. Who can match this life? I would pay to be born between these two eras. So I think it's fascinating. And I think that has come across in all my work, where I'm able to hold on to a lot of nostalgia, to hold on कि मैं उसकी भी बात कर पाता हूँ कि वो जो रसगुल्ले वाला आता था 3 बजे, वो जो पोस्टमैन आता था 3 बजे. I know those people. And in our stories, I think I'm able to keep alive those people in some way. And a lot of people often ask me, and I also wonder, my youngest known listener is 5 years old, like everyday listener. And my oldest is like grandparents. Why would a 5-year-old, or let alone a 5-year-old, why would a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 16-year-old listen to our stories? They don't relate to this world. I was in Kasoli many years ago, and there was this rooftop restaurant. The hotel was owned by my friend, so he used to push me to sing every evening. And I was singing a song I had written, Maine dil se kaha dhoond lana khushi, na samajh laya gham to ye gham hi sahi, from the film Rogue. And I found this young boy, 18, 19 years old, who was singing along and came up to me and said, "Sir, मैं तो रोता हूँ ये गाना सुन के सर आप यहाँ मिल गए मेरा मतलब it's biggest moment." And I'm thinking, why does this guy relate to it? He was not even born, I think, or must have been very young when the song was written. And the answer is as follows. The answer is that as a communicator, if our work has universal emotions, we can never fail. And it's a science I have learned during the course of my journey. When I have narrated stories and I've had people from Kashmir call in, from Sopor, from Kupwara, from Northeast, from where in the case of Kashmir, they would not like the idea of India. But in the night, they would hear stories from this guy who's rooting and setting his stories in that very idea, right? That very geography, that very place, and crying with those stories. And why? Because there is a universal emotion there. The father-son emotion, the feeling of loss, the words that we talk about. Or when I get a call from a listener in Guwahati who very sweetly says, a male listener who says, "मैं आपकी कहानियां रोज सुनती हूँ." Why does he say that? Why does he relate to these stories? Or people in the southern part of the country, or different age groups, or different people from different social strata. So when I started this journey, I had no Excel sheet in front of me. I had no plan in front of me. I didn't know any kind of stories that I wanted to narrate. But I was just, in the first season, I wrote all the stories, and I was just, it was my stories from my growing up years, my small town, Nainital, Lucknow. They were set in this imaginary city of Yad Shahar, but they were actually, everything had either happened with me or around me, or I had seen that. And I found that, I might be digressing in this answer, but I found that I had scraped somewhere the urban dust of the average listener. In a country with some of the oldest and richest storytelling traditions of the world, we had forgotten them. And, I have these two imaginary milestones in my head about how did storytelling die? Or rather, the simple act of parents and grandparents narrating stories to their children. First, the cable TV arrived. Until that point, Doordarshan was kind of held the integrity compass when it came to content. Whatever else you might call it, it believed in good content. But that became a level playing field in a bad way, in my view, when cable TV arrived. Because suddenly now it was all about, winning the audiences. So different kind of content was there, but it had huge takers. So suddenly, when your 9 p.m. programming, 10 p.m. programming started, that simple act of narrating stories to your children went out of the window. Economic liberalization, or the economic reforms, when they happened, and I sometimes draw the direct linkage between the economic reforms and storytelling. Might seem odd, but suddenly the father or the mother who used to come home at 5:30 was now coming home at 9:30, because privatization brought different work cultures, different working hours. The whole definition of 9 to 5 was changing. And so the time spent with the family, where storytelling was a very strong bond within families, that changed. Even grandparents became busy. And then, of course, the arrival of the mobile phones, etc., etc. So when we started storytelling, it was nothing new. We were just scraping the dust of the urban existence of people. And a lot of people realized that this is the world that they left behind. This is the world that they miss, but they might not have heard that voiced in so many ways. Also, nostalgia had not been creatively captured until then. The only reference before that to nostalgia was Ali Haidar's song Purani Jeans. And after that, nothing really had happened. I remember writing a piece in Brunch, which kind of started this entire journey. I was working at Hindustan Times. I was the deputy executive editor. And I was doing a series called Mission Kashmir, but I was traveling with a Kashmiri Muslim and a Kashmiri Pandit colleague. And we used to sort of look for stories in remote Kashmir as we journeyed. And Poonam Saxena was then the editor of Branch, said कि तुम कह रहे थे cover story लिखोगे तुम Branch के तो लिखो भी on 50 years of Doordarshan. And I wrote this story, which I realized was my own story. As I started writing it reluctantly, but then I realized it was me. It had my grandmother who was coming with guavas and salt and that little a different kind of a salt called buknu sprinkled on it. I remember that it was about that wooden case of the TV and India versus West Indies cricket matches and Shrikant and Malcolm Marshall and that era. And the response to that one piece told me that it had touched some raw nerve, which I didn't even know existed. And that then led to me sort of creating this. A music company had approached me, and then we did we created a band called Nine, and then we did this album called Rewind. And then when we wanted a radio partner for that, it became a radio show. And everything then came together again. The journalism, the nostalgia, the small town sort of experiences, all of it was coming together. And because I was straddling these two worlds, I was able to remain content. I think it was a new take on nostalgia because it was contemporary at one level, but it had roots, and in that sense it defined how we are, millions of us urban Indians, who we are. That when a puja is happening at our home, we do think of whether we can look for that kurta pajama, kept somewhere away, which we would otherwise, might not wear and opt for denim jeans. That's who we are. That's so the contemporary and our roots, they walk side by side. They exist side by side. And I also realized that audiences also have a split personality. Young people. I suddenly realized that when I started storytelling, I started it, of course, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to sell the CDs of my album and promote it and etc. I'd done just a 3-month contract with Big FM to do it, and I thought I would do it, and I'm out of it. My album would work. But at that point also, I thought that my audience was 30, 35 and above. People who would have some nostalgia. And I suddenly realized that there were 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 16-year-olds who were loving these stories. And that's when I realized that it's we, the communicators, who stereotype our audiences. It's we who say that, oh, this is a 13-year-old audience. Well, oh, they'll be dumb. No, it's we who's dumb. We don't work hard for our audiences. We don't create good content that they would like. It's not that they don't like this stuff. We didn't work hard enough for them to like our stuff. And so there have been great learnings as a communicator in this entire sort of road that I have traveled. I feel this, and I quite mean it when I say that I've become a better person in narrating stories, because once again, that thing I started with my journalism, every day I become the other. Every day I become someone else. And in doing so, I'm able to see the world from someone else's point of view. It might be an unpopular person. It might be an angry person. It might be a woman. It might be a little child. And that helps me in my real life also look at everybody and look at the world from their point of view.
So a number of strands. I mean, one, of course, is very resonant to me when you talk about, us sort of being that bridge generation, which is kind of rooted to the past and nostalgic about it, but also there is this brave new world we've entered. And equally, it's almost become a cliche to my listeners how I keep saying people contain multitudes. And what social media often tends to do is become very reductive, that you choose your ideological tribe and you are in your echo chamber, and then you are sort of trying to raise your status within it.
Oh, don't get me started on social media.
Yeah. So here's a thought that kind of has been with me for a few weeks. I recently, so I teach this writing course where I talk about how we should always look for the concrete and favor the concrete over the abstract, because that is what makes things relatable. I did an episode with Aanchal Malhotra recently. She did that great book on, memories of partition, where again she's exploring concrete objects. And through that, what you find is that, when you get to that intimate level of a particular object, you see the good side of people. But when you get to larger abstractions, like nationalism or like religion and all of those, and it's those abstractions that can sometimes tear you apart. And like one observation of mine, obviously, is that what seems to have happened, though I will hold that cable television and liberalization are a big net benefit, but I understand your point exactly, that what seems to have happened is that they allow abstraction to scale, and therefore they subdue the concrete by giving it less time. So instead of, a father sitting with his daughter and telling her a story at 8 p.m., you have the father coming home late, and you have these toxic narratives of whatever is happening on news TV dominating. And one of the things that I love about your storytelling is how you privilege the contract, like the concrete. Like there's this story called Saregama Pa, which you wrote in your first season, which towards the beginning has this girl who loves music, and she's gotten married and she's entering her marital home, and she overhears her new husband telling the servant कि ये हारमोनियम
हारमोनियम
स्टोर पे रखो,
स्टोर में रखो,
इसकी जरूरत नहीं है. And she's passionate about music. That's a big passion. And suddenly that kind of brings home, and that whole shift is so beautifully communicated by that concrete object. And in one of your other conversations, you spoke about how so many people got in touch with you after that and said, "Aapko kaise pata?"
Yeah, ये तो मेरी माँ की story, ये तो मेरी story है. It was really amazing.
So my question is that, this sort of guideline that I, for example, tell my writing students, that privilege the concrete or whatever, this golden rule of storytelling almost, is something that completely comes to life in your work. Now, when you are getting drawn to storytelling, and you've already spoken about how that, like I was actually going to ask you a question about your transition from journalism to radio, but while you were speaking, I realized that it's not really a transition, that you're storytelling. You've just kind of moved from one form to the other. But my question now here is that, we will read all these books of writing advice, and some people will do courses like mine, and there will be all these guidelines. People who want to write for films will buy Robert McKee's story or all these Sitfield books, or ye 3-act structure hai, ye waisa hai. There's a great book by Christopher Booker called The 7 Basic Plots, which is ki saat hi kahaniyan hai, everything is a version on those. Now, as you are discovering the craft of storytelling, and the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is related, is that you've done something extraordinary in the sense that you've not only told your own stories, but you've taken the stories of others and, made them come to life. While the conventional understanding, and my understanding also, I must confess, would be that not everybody can be a great storyteller. But what you seem to have done is almost democratized that and told stories of many others and given form to them. So give me some of your sort of insights about the craft of storytelling and how your understanding of the craft of storytelling evolved in this time. Like, is there a structure? And so often what can happen is a convention can become a formula. So from something positive, it can become a negative. So do you think in terms of structure, what are the important facets of storytelling that you consider? How do you approach the art of storytelling?
So, like I said in the beginning, my biggest strength in my view is that I have no baggage of convention. I don't know how something should be done. So I cook up some way of doing that. I didn't know how to start a band or start a rural media company or do on-camera interviews. I'd never done video. So, when radio started, and it started again, ek khubsurat ittifaq tha, I was asked by the CEO, Tarun Katyal, who now heads Z5, कि आप show करोगे? And I said, I don't think I can do radio. I said, नहीं, आप कर सकते हो. I said, okay, कहानियां सुनाऊंगा. And I was just, I was bluffing my way actually, because before this, what had happened was that when we formed the band, Amit Khanna was then the chairman of Reliance Entertainment. He called me, and long story short, I mean, he said, "Aap album karo." So I realized that piracy had killed this whole business. And they said, आप live shows करना और उससे पैसा आप कमाना और then you pay us our advance back and etc. And I mean, I had never remotely been connected with anything like a band. I don't even actually understand English music. One of my big regrets, because I don't understand the accent. People laugh at it, but I don't understand it. So when we formed this band with a few friends who were musicians, etc., and I said, let's create a storytelling band. I said, okay, how will that work? Because I have a fetish for like new ideas. I was just bluffing my way. I said, okay, well, the storyteller will start the story and he'll go off stage. A song will start, which is written by the same writer, and then he'll come back and continue the story. And I said, well, this can't work. And then I sort of convinced them. We debuted at the Kala Ghoda festival, and just like I had kind of tried to remain relevant in a band as a writer. Because they said, Acha, I said, let's form a writer-led band. They said, what will a writer do on stage? And in that instant moment, that was truly a life-changing moment, because I said that out of nowhere, I said, well, the writer will tell a story. And all I was doing was I wanted to not be the non-playing captain, to sit there and, watch. That was all. I wanted to remain relevant. And that had led me to this moment when I was being offered a radio show. And only to remain relevant, I said, storytelling kar lenge, story. Acha. So I went back and I wrote a story. And the story was called Diwali Ki Raat. It was my first story. It's extremely simple. And until then, I had never written a Hindi story in my life. I had just written one story in English, which was an awful story in my childhood. That was it. In a real sense, I had never even written a story in my life. So forget craft or anything like that. I didn't know how to structure it. It was a simple story about a man who cannot go home for Diwali. And I think this thing that I talk about, the universal emotion, a lot of people related to it, because whichever faith you follow, not going home, not being able to go home for your festival is a very common thing. And when they okayed the show, I barely had one or two stories ready, and suddenly I was riding a tiger, because it was a daily show. So I would write all night, and I would record in the morning, and then have lunch at the Big FM office, and then go back and start writing again. It was like the toughest and most creatively satisfying 3 months of my life. I was writing a new plot every day, new characters. I was not even writing like a whole series. And that's when I started to think very differently. So I would go to, like I'm sitting here, there's an armchair next to me in my study, and I would think that, okay, what if this armchair was telling its story? कितने लोग इस पे बैठे होंगे, या कितनी बातें इसने सुनी होंगी, कितने राज इसने सुने होंगे. एक बार मैंने कहानी लिखी, एक चवन्नी की आत्मकथा, when they were phasing out the 25 पैसा coin, वो चवन्नी अपनी आत्मकथा बता रही है. So I started again this whole thing of seeing the world from other people's point of view. I was kind of extending that to often seeing it from inanimate objects point of view. And there was a story on this old postman who was about to retire, and his son wants to move away, and he like resents it, and the wife explains, and the grandson says, Papa, Baba, आपका time गया, अभी email का time आ गया, because the postman है. But I think I was learning as I was writing, and there was no other storytelling show to be afraid of or to compare it against. So I had nothing holding me back. I had the creative control. So slowly, I think what emerged was, in the first season, again, there was no craft I followed. There was no rule I followed, because I knew no rules. But what happened after that was that a lot of young people started to come to me कि हम लिखना चाहते हैं कहानियां. And I said, look, मैं कहानियां खरीदने के धंधे में नहीं हूं. मैं टीचर का बेटा हूं, तो साथ बैठ के कर सकते हैं. थोड़ा आपसे सीखूंगा, थोड़ा मैं आपको सिखाऊंगा. So when season 1 was over, none of that was on my mind. When season 2 started, between that there was a gap, and some young people started coming to my home in Bombay. And because I had called them on Monday at 11 o'clock, every Monday I used to call them at 11, and I said, Achha, I have a thing for naming and branding things and stuff. So I said, okay, let's call this something. I think it looks like this will become something big. I said after the first 2 meetings, I said, let's call it the Monday Mandli. And then the Monday went off and it became just the Mandli. Now, how do you create a form? Because I didn't know how to teach writing or anything. And the structure of my small living room was such that there were 2 sofas on opposite sides. So they would all sit there. Before I knew it, there were like 10, 12 people coming, all these, aspirants. And I used to sit on the same rocking chair, like this old grandfather. And so one person would narrate a story, and then I would, for the first few times, I would say, what did you think of it? And we would go around the room when everybody used to say what they thought of the story. And slowly, a form was emerging. A process was emerging. Until then, there was no process. Now, I said, you can't say, I liked it. If you liked it, why did you like it? If you didn't like it, why did you not like it? So, in the beginning, it was me who was doing most of the talking because I spoke in the end. And slowly as we went by, I realized that I was doing the least talking because they had said what I wanted to, which was delightful. Because their craft of appreciating or not liking a story. And even, I was also now analyzing stories. What about this protagonist? And slowly we evolved a science to it. So it's a 6-segment story on radio. The first segment kind of introduces the protagonist and something of the plot, the premise, the one-liner. The second takes that forward, and around the third, the conflict sets in, and so on and so forth. Then we started enjoying that process. So for example, I did something called Kahani Ek Ending Panch. So I did 5 stories, and I said I'll write the first one. So the story was, it would start with one moment, and you had to write 5 separate stories with the same names of the character and 5 completely different stories, not even endings. So the story was that there was a park, in a corner of the park was a bench. There was a woman sitting. She was sitting seriously, and there was a guy looking for something in the grass. That was the moment. Who are they? What's their relationship? Are they strangers? Do they know each other? What's he looking for in the grass? We don't know. So that evolved. Then I used to say, okay, move the camera. The story is told from one person's point of view. Move it to that subsidiary character's point of view. The POV changes. What does the story look like now? But most of all, what is a story? A story is a journey that takes the listener from a certain place, through a certain place, to a certain place. So a letter could also be a story. A page written in a diary could also be a story. As long as the listener has traveled somewhere between the beginning of the story and the end of it. So we started experimenting. We started doing concepts like, I will give you the title of a story and you will write it. And today the titles will be around colors. The story is Lal. This week I'll give you stories around different times of the day. So your story is Dhai Baje. That's the title. Your story is Subha 7 Baje. So I think we were having fun. It was like a laboratory and we were evolving. I now regret I should have recorded a lot of, because I speak passionately at these mandalis and I often say the same things and etc. But slowly I think the craft emerged that yes, there was some kind of a science behind it. I was also extremely mindful that as we got along, as we down the show, that we'd never wanted to stereotype or objectify people on the basis of their color of skin or weight or which part of the country they came from or the usual shortcuts that communicators use on radio or TV. I didn't want my listener to feel defeated at the end. There was one story I had done. So there was one story called मेरी प्यारी एक्स पत्नी, और उसके अगले दिन थी मेरे प्यारे एक्स हस्बैंड. तो मेरे प्यारे एक्स हस्बैंड में जो वाइफ है, she is a very evil character who, really deceives this guy. And a lot of the listeners wrote in. That's the only story they wrote in. They said, "Sir, we didn't like this story because this was an ugly character, and there should be no ugly characters in Yad Sheher, because this is our catharsis. This is our de-stressing time." So there are negative characters. There are characters you don't like, but you can't have a character who's out to destroy someone and there's no arc. There's no redemption. There's nothing. The bad person gets away. So those were some of the things that I like. I'm not doing. These are not documenting time, so I'm very mindful of the impact of whatever I do, whether it's storytelling, whether it's journalism. The impact is hugely important to me. And that impact should be either through journalism, you solve problems. There's a hospital that has shut down, you get it started. There's some injustice being done, you point it out. Through storytelling, a lot of people have told us that their depression was healed. And people of different age groups, students have said it from Kota, young adults have said it, young couples have said it, older people, grandparents have said it. So all kinds of people have said their depression was healed. That is so exciting. What can be more exciting as a communicator? A lot of young people have said they got better grades because of our stories. So people students, they say that because we didn't feel the stress, people have said we are able to do math better because while we are doing math, your story is playing. And I can never understand that, but I've heard it so often that I'm curious to find out the link. So the impact is, you could say that these stories are far removed from reality, that not nobody, but the good people don't lose in them. You could say that. But at one level, they are about reality, and they are about how we think the world should be. I mean, an interpretation of living with differences, with living with our shortcomings, with coming to terms with our past, our present, and things like that. So, but the one thing that kind of saddens me is that the literary world does not see my work as literature. They look down upon it. I think they look at it just like, that this is entertainment. When we were writing stories, whenever we write, the brief in the Mandali is that you're not writing for radio, you're writing literature. But because it's on a mass medium, because it's not in the form of a book, because it did not first appear in the form of a book, and that upsets me. That is classist. That upsets me. Other than that, I think I'm extremely happy that our stories have had an impact that many other forms of communication might not have had. I often tell our Mandali writers that what you're doing is far more powerful than some of the biggest singers, some of the biggest artists, some of the biggest actors, because what you're doing makes people make their life choices. We've had so many people writing in, hundreds and hundreds, saying that we repaired our marriage because we heard such and such story. My family was breaking apart. My mother and my wife were not getting along. And then we heard this story and we wept and they wept and we became fine. Or I was in a bad relationship and I realized that, and I got the courage to break up with my boyfriend or my husband because of certain story. I mean, imagine that power. That is the power that our stories have had on our audiences. And people write to us in the most personal of ways. I mean, what other form of communication would have this? So it's a great act of responsibility also that has to come with it. Yeah.
So I'll make a bunch of sort of speculative points here. One,
Sure.
as far as all those people tell you that it helps them do math if your story is on in the background, that would simply be because of your very soothing voice. Like when I am working on something, I'll also put on some soothing instrumental music generally, but something that doesn't really interfere with me. So maybe that's a function of your voice. But getting sort of more serious, I think one, I mean, there are of course many reasons behind the snobbishness of the
Right.
literary sorts and where that could be coming from.
Right.
But one interesting sort of distinction, and I'm just thinking aloud, is that whereas that kind of literary writing sets out to reflect the human condition, what you try to do in your storytelling is also address the human condition in the sense that people crave stories for whatever reasons, and you fulfill a certain kind of narrative craving within them. Now, again, thinking aloud, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but what we see increasingly in modern times is that, we know that people explain the world to themselves through stories,
Mhm.
but there is also a craving for a certain kind of story which often baffles me, whether it's a sort of QAnon movement in the US of conspiracy theories, or whether it's what happened here recently in Mumbai after, SSR died, and there were all these conspiracy theories that actually he invented 4G and that's why they got rid of him, or he had a cure for COVID, so that's why they got rid of him.
Oh, I
And
didn't
all
hear
these
this. Oh,
yeah. So
oh,
there was stories that he had a patent for COVID and all of that, and that's why they bumped him off. There was another story which had Akshay Kumar as a villain because apparently SSR had invented 4G. These were all happening on Twitter and all of that, and I'd come across them and take screenshots because what if they disappear? But
yeah,
they're just all over.
yeah.
You can find them.
Mm.
And it kind of, so it's not just the stuff that is on news television, the toxic stuff of murder and drugs and all that. There are also these completely wild angles which become viral because people want to believe. The more outrageous it is, it seems people want to believe. Now, I can understand that people find your sort of stories soothing and meaningful because one, they provide a sort of comfort and tradition and all of that. Too, they make you see the world through the eyes of the other, like you've pointed out about how a story by your daughter can be so meaningful to you because through her eyes you realize how tall a table is
Mm.
or how high a door is, and I can see why that can actually change people with the way they look at the world. But do you have any speculations on why there is this deep desire for all these bizarre kind of stories as well, like we've seen recently?
I think it is a titillation of sorts that we want. Did what happened to Sebastian Bose? We don't know, right? But a part of us wants to believe that he's alive, that he was alive to a certain point, or whatever. So I think this side of us that does not want closure on certain things that might be dear to us, like with Sebastian Bose, like with Sushant Singh Rajput, or things that had a pat explanation. That doesn't satisfy us. Also, we have been fed with so much by way of research for conspiracies. Now you have OTT shows that actually teach you how to kill, right? And you have a ustra. Here's the part of the neck where you hit, and here's how the blood comes out. You can watch it, like so. Before OTT, I mean, so I might seem like a very old-fashioned person when it comes to communication, but I realized that my views have been very, very consistent. There was once a celebrated Hindi author on a TV show with me. This was after that song came out, DK Bose, and they put me on TV, and I said, like, what nonsense is this? What about why can't good lyrics be written? Was my point of view. And he said, he's no more. He said, आप गरीब के गंदे पांव अपने घर में आने नहीं देना चाहते, और गरीब ऐसे ही बोलता है, गरीब गाली देता है. सो आई सेड, क्या अमीर गाली नहीं देता? ये गरीब का एंगल कैसे आ गया? And he said, we are showing the reality. So I said, if you're showing the reality, well, there are many other realities, which might be even more gory. The act of going to the latrine every day. Why don't you show that? If this is not reality, this is titillation. And that is the tussle. What is the purpose of communication? And what is the purpose of a communicator? If it is to solve problems, for sure, show the grisly, gory reality, which is what journalism does. But if the purpose is to show the unseeable, or what was earlier seen as unseeable, I mean, at that point, what I said, there was no OTT then, but I said, when you have these songs with lyrics like these, with lyrics that objectify women, कि मैं क्या बोटी बन जाऊंगी और तुम मुझे खा लेना, and when you're doing that, and the same song is playing at the school reception, at the hospital reception, on mass media TV, I mean, what are you doing? Are you realizing the impact of it? Are you able to limit children or young adults from watching it? No, you're not. But in the name of the freedom of expression, you're not realizing the impact that you. Most communicators do not realize their power, or if they do, they don't give a damn. And that includes journalists, that includes writers. When a journalist stands and holds a mic and says, "तीन आतंकवादी शहर में घुस आए हैं," you know what that does? What that does is that someone will not send their daughter to their friend's birthday at the McDonald's because they said it on TV. So that journalist, that reporter, for him or her, it's just a news bulletin and it's over. They don't know their power. And if they know their power, because now a lot of them do, they are very powerful, then they're not using that power responsibly. And the same is for lyric writers, is the same for film producers. And I seem like, I seem so old-fashioned and like अपना ये ढोल बजाते रहते हैं कि responsibility होनी चाहिए communicators की. But I strongly believe that. I strongly believe that, with the explosion of content in our face today, I'm so scared of what my daughter watches, because the algorithm of the YouTube, she might start with a nursery rhyme or Peppa Pig and might land up God knows where. And I have no control over that, right? So that bothers me. These days, as you know, I'm infuriated against this whole white hat junior business, right? It's not about a company. It's about the fact that it's about the audacity that you've crossed one more Lakshman Rekha. You've crossed many Lakshman Rekhas. When the chocolate industry came, when the diamond industry was invented out of nowhere, it was, this FOMO, fear of missing out. This whole IIT and medical thing that you and I we lived through that era. If we were not clearing those exams, we would be, but childhood, for the education space, a sacred space, however sold out it might be, I mean, that's where I draw the line. And as a father of a 5-year-old, I will not take this, and I will speak out, and which I have been doing. So the responsibility. So, for example, I might go as a founder of a company with a business idea. That is a great story. And I might get some $50 million of investment today. Will the investor or investors look at the social impact, or you have fantasy cricket apps today? You're gambling. You're legitimizing gambling, and you're encouraging people, not just encouraging, nudging them. You're putting, campaigns of tens of millions of dollars behind them, so that young people go and gamble. Do you even know what that will do? Is there no sense of responsibility for that universe? Or is, because your heroes in that investing business are the people, the blue-eyed boys, because they're mostly boys, are, the flavor of the season, who's got this investment of 100 million, 200 million, 1 billion. That's it. What they're doing, what is the impact of that? Nobody gives a damn. That's why my Twitter bio, the first line reads, "Decency is my business model." And through everything, I will stand for that. That through whether, so we're doing the slow movement now, which includes slow content, slow products, so on, slow experiences. We're selling slow cookies also, but there is an honesty in it that I'm standing for this. This will not be lying on a label like you hear all the time. If our venture is selling honey, I guarantee you that it's pure. So it should reflect that honesty. And that's what bothers me, that everything cannot be up for sale. If you are a content creator, you have a huge power. If I was the head of one of these big TV networks, imagine the power I would wield, and I would say, hey, let's do something that ends female infanticide. Because I know I have that power through content. If my, tiny little effort on radio can have people say that they were healed of depression, well, imagine if I had a gazillion times more eyeballs. So that bothers me. And I think that's a conversation which is uncomfortable. I might seem like that angry fufa in a wedding जो कोने में रहते हैं और हमेशा गुस्सा हो जाते हैं. But yes, I am that angry fufa who is bothered by a lot of things. And in the middle of all that, I don't want to be perpetually upset, perpetually angry, perpetually outraged. Because if I'm outraged all the time on social media, it draws me away from the other things I do, which have a positive effect, which have a good effect. So those things sap my mind. If someone abuses you on Twitter, it affects my day. It ruins my day. Some unknown person who never gives a damn, who abused you and went on to the next person to abuse, but you feel so defeated. ये कौन है यार, इसने ऐसा कैसे कह दिया, ये मेरे सामने होता, इसकी आंखों में आंखें डाल के मैं कहता कि तू सोच भी रहा है तो क्या बोल रहा है भाई.
अगर वो आपके सामने होता तो बोलता ही नहीं. बट हैव यू हर्ड ऑफ द आशीष नेहरा अप्रोच टू इंटरनेट ट्रोलिंग?
No, what is that?
So Ashish Nehra was once in some kind of controversy, and he was getting madly trolled on Twitter and people abusing him and all. So 3 days after it started, a reporter went to him and said ki Nehra ji, ye sab trolling ho raha hai, what is your reaction? So Nehra is like, what trolling? And then he takes out his phone and shows him, and it's one of those Nokia push button phones. So, if you don't allow yourself to be trolled, they can't troll you. I mean, what, they're going to stand outside your house and throw emojis at you or something?
Yeah.
Let's there is so much more to talk about. Let's take a quick commercial break, and then we'll kind of speed towards the end.
All right.
If you enjoy listening to The Scene and the Unseen, you can play a part in keeping the show alive. The Scene and the Unseen has been a labor of love for me. I've enjoyed putting together many stimulating conversations, expanding my brain and my universe, and hopefully yours as well. But while the work has been its own reward, I don't actually make much money off the show. Although The Scene and the Unseen has great numbers, advertisers haven't really woken up to the insane engagement level of podcasts, and I do many hours of deep research for each episode, besides all the logistics of producing the show myself. Scheduling guests, booking studios, paying technicians, the travel and so on. So well, I'm trying a new way of keeping this thing going, and that involves you. My proposition for you is this: for every episode of The Scene and the Unseen that you enjoy, buy me a cup of coffee, or even a lavish lunch, whatever you feel it's worth. You can do this by heading over to sceneunseen.in/support and contributing an amount of your choice. This is not a subscription. The Scene and the Unseen will continue to be free on all podcast apps and at sceneunseen.in. This is just a gesture of appreciation. Help keep this thing going. sceneunseen.in/support. Welcome back to The Scene and the Unseen. I'm chatting with Nilesh Mishra, who just described himself with one of my favorite words in the Hindi language. He said he is the angry fufa, which is such a delightful word. So, one of the other, before I also want to move on to the art of conversation and chat about that, because again, that's something at which you are such a master. But before we go on to that, a broader question that I had earlier, that, you've come from a slightly different background from somebody who's been a journalist for Reuters and AP and all of that, in the sense that you've grown up in these small towns which are also different from each other, as you pointed out, and you've been multilingual in the sense ki kafi journalists whom I see around me are, English, everything is English. And, I used to read Hindi once upon a time, but now I don't know if I'll be able to read a book in Hindi, for example. But in your case, it's sort of been an even influence. And does that also shape the sort of person you are, that sort of being easily multilingual? And, does it shape the way you look at the world? And does it then also shape the form of whatever you do?
I think so. I think it gives me a kind of a familiarity for my audiences, and also a confidence, because For example, I've been an English journalist for my entire work life, but I started Hindi storytelling and then started Gaon Connection, and it was all Hindi journalism. So often when I tweet in English, some people say, "Sir, Hindi में बोल दो." सर हिंदी में भी तो कभी बोल दिया करो कुछ ट्रोल टाइप. तो फिर मैं बोलता हूँ कि तो मैं कहानियां क्या फारसी में सुनाता हूँ मैं. So I think I have that gives me that authority, I would say. With the English speaking world, it gives me a slight subversiveness to tell them in English that there are other realities, especially in the rural context. So often the kind of stereotypes that the English media has and perpetuates about rural India, I think I can, rather than looking in from the outside, I can tell them in the language that they understand in. And that gives me a slight subversiveness. And so I think it helps.
One of the things you've spoken about with regard to storytelling is you're seeing the world through the eyes of the others. So therefore empathy goes up, it changes you as a person and so on and so forth, and it seems to me that the conversations that you have, for example, whether in the slow interview or all of the other, the slow cafe, which you've done recently in the lockdown, seem to me to be also an extension of that, because like what we see in modern conversations, which really irritates me, which I see in modern interviews, is that I don't see people listening. So the interviewer will be interrupting all the time. He'll be trying to show how smart he is, and and he'll be playing the gotcha game. And it's as Stephen Covey once said, that you're not listening to understand, you're listening to reply, which is almost a toxic habit. And what you do in all of your interviews so well is that you'll just give the person all the space in the world. Like one of the things that I love about your interviews, which it takes to an extent greater than with any other interviewer I've seen, is that you really allow for silence. That there will be these long stretches of silence. I remember your interview with Tigmanshu Dhulia when you asked him about his friend Irfan Khan, who is so ill, and he's lost in thought, and you don't say a word. You let the silence be there. You don't edit it out. And I found and you've done that in other conversations as well, that there are moments where, you haven't felt that I have to force the conversation along, ki flow chalna chahiye, abhi main kya puchu? Oh, this is the next question on my list, ye puchta hu. Instead, how did you arrive at that?
Thank you. That's a very perceptive question. So, the slow interview was not planned as a show, like most things in my life. When over the last many years, when I taking a step back, I was living in Bombay and I started Gaon Connection in 2012. And then I was coming here once in a while. I used to come for 15 days, 20 days, literally living out of a suitcase. And then going back, and then one day my wife asked me, where's home? And it was again a life-changing question, because I couldn't give a clear answer if it was Lucknow or Bombay. And I said that it does. She said, well, if you are so passionate about Gaon Connection, then let's move here, which was unthinkable for me at the time, completely unthinkable, because I was then working with the biggest of movie studios, etc., and I was fairly sorted. So anyway, I started coming here, and of course, running Gaon Connection has been an entire other battle itself, the biggest battle of my life. But the school that my parents started, that got left behind in some way in the battle to run Gaon Connection. And that used to give me guilt. So when I went there on one of the occasions, I said, let's build a room here, and so that we can come and at least stay here once in a while. And if I'm here, then I'll look at the school also and its problems, and maybe I can help address them in some way. So my wife then built 3 rooms and a little drawing room and all that. And I had never thought I would spend any considerable time there. But it came out quite well, and she said, She one day said that I need a name for this because sign lagana hai bahar. So I didn't want to give a name like Land's End or so-and-so Kutir or so-and-so Villa or whatever. I didn't think much. I thought for just 2 minutes. I said, let's call it Slow. And she immediately approved it, liked it. I said, it should be called what we feel here, the state of mind here. So we called it Slow. And then I started going there, staying there. So the mental block of being cut off from the city slowly evaporated, and I started liking that. And I used to post pictures on social media sometimes. So my daughter, who I'm delighted that she has friends in the village also, friends from rich families also, friends in my parents' middle class building also. So some picture of hers I put with her friends in the village on the veranda, which is like a black and white, like a chessboard colored. So Pankaj Tripathi is someone I knew on social media. I never met him. So I was going to Bombay and I messaged him like, मिल लेते हैं, finally. So he said, मैं तो आपके शहर में हूँ. So I met him the next day and I said, गाँव चलते हैं. So I drove and I had asked 2 camera persons to just sit behind us and shoot randomly. And we were talking and normally, and they were shooting, and we were so unprepared that we had one mic between the 2 of us. So there was no show or anything like that planned. When we reached and we spoke some more there, and then when Pankaj left, I said, "ये तो अच्छा हो गया, इसको कुछ बना देते हैं." So it was something like that Monday moment when I said, "ये कुछ बड़ा बन जाएगा लगता है, इसको एक नाम दे देते हैं." The same thing here. I said, लग रहा है कि कुछ अच्छा है, इसको नाम देते हैं. Because it is done at Slow, let's call it the Slow interview. And it also very well and very honestly defines that conversation, that this is not an interview which will be sensational or hurried or will have a what do they call it, rapid fire, or this is not that. So it very clearly, for the audience, it defines it. So we put it out. And once again, I was at that juncture in my life when I was doing something I had never done. I didn't know how to do it. I'm a newspaper person. While I'm not afraid of the camera, I've come in front of the camera for different reasons, but I was not a visual person. So now here I was kind of directing a show. And so the camera team initially, and very capable colleagues, they said, sir, ये एक्सेस होता है ऐसे, ये एक्सेस क्रॉस मत करिएगा. मैंने कहा भाड़ में गया एक्सेस तुम्हारा. मैंने कहा एक वर्ड याद रख लो, तकिया के नीचे लिख लेना, lurking. The camera should be lurking. That's it. 2 people are talking and the camera can be anywhere, it's lurking. And we started working on camera position. It was exciting for me. I was experiencing the same thrill again. Like we used to do these kahani ek ending 5, those little experiments with something that you have control over, but no conventional knowledge of. So there's no pressure कि वो मेरे पुराने बॉस ने बोला था कि ऐसे ही किया जाता है. When I was doing storytelling, if somebody else was doing it before me, I would have that pressure कि वो तो ऐसे बोलते हैं या ऐसे बोलती हैं वो, या ऐसा. I could be myself. So I always narrated stories as if I'm narrating to a person next to me on a park bench. That was always my reference. And here I was again, at this juncture of my creative career, where it was the same excitement of starting something again. And I told our team that this is not an interview. This is a scene. Imagine that this is a scene from a film. How would the camera look at the subjects? It would not look at 2 people sitting left, right, and you're looking at it, right? So we evolved a new visual grammar. We broke all templates of how interviews should be shot because I didn't know how they should be shot. My ignorance led to us creating a new form. And suddenly, these colleagues of ours who are from the biggest TV channels and they left that world, came here, and they were, I think, somewhere conscious and unsure that we are breaking all the rules. What will the veterans think? And suddenly they were getting messages like, oh my God, we've never seen anything like this. What are these camera angles? Then a new video editor arrived, and I remember he edited the Manoj Bajpayee interview. And I watched it and I said, my reaction was, where are the pauses? He said, sir, वो लंबे लंबे pauses थे. मैं कहा, भाई pauses ही तो show है. So, I mean, I'm quite happy you pointed out the pauses and the silences. And that's what this is not a show that looks for headlines. This is not a headline hunting show. This is not a sensational show. There have been at least 2 occasions when guests have called after the show कि यार मैं तो भूल ही गया था कि कैमरा चल रहा है, मैं इतना एनग्रॉस था, मैं यार वो चीज कह गया था, यार हटा दोगे क्या वो वाली चीज? हाँ, हटा देंगे. Which any other TV channel person would jump because they were controversial or too honest, and hence controversial or whatever. And I think it goes back to the humility of communicators. It goes back to knowing and realizing that this show is not about me. My playground is separate. When I have the mic, when it's me talking and people are listening, that is a separate playground. This is not that. This is, I am, and I often tell this to guests in these exact same words. It's kind of a cliche. I tell them कि मैं एक postman हूं, एक librarian हूं मैं. So I also don't want these conversations to be dated. I never ask them आपकी अगली film कौन सी आ रही है. And I tell them in the beginning, I'm not interested. This is not the show where you promote your next film. You can do that in Slow Cafe. We've designed a new show, digital show. You can talk about it, but not in the Slow interview. And what happened was that initially, I mean, it's a bit like everything else I've done in my life, that if we had told people that I'm starting a show which will have nothing controversial, nothing newsy, nothing about their filmy gossip, and will be this long, so somebody might have said the same sentence which I've heard in many forms when I've started something new, which is that this is a brilliant idea, it will never work. So when I started it, I was slightly hesitant. The first Pankaj Tripathi episode is only 30 minutes, which seemed very long to me because the conventional wisdom handed over by the pundits was that YouTube is about snackable content, short form content, etc., etc. But I realized that the people said, "So, agla part ka hai?" So we did another part of 30 minutes, and it was the same people who watched Netflix and Amazon. And they were loving these conversations, which, had nothing titillating to offer. They were exactly the kind of tonality that we are talking about in right now. And there were also internal academic sort of tussles within the team on the format of the length. If it became 45 minutes, initially people would start getting antsy, so it's very long. And I used to say, even if it's 2 hours, let the viewer decide. No? If they want to watch 30 minutes, let them watch it. But there might be 10 people out of 200 who might watch the whole 2 hours. No? Why are you depriving them when you have that conversation? So slowly, and when the numbers started coming in, when we had millions of people watching them, we got the graceful and humble confidence that we have invented a new form, a new type. And then suddenly we started getting requests from people to feature them or their artists in these interviews. I don't know if viewers notice or not, but I go in my interview with zero preparation. I don't like talking to my guests before the shoot begins, because how I am off camera is exactly as I am with them on camera. There's no put on, there's nothing that's artificial. The show doesn't even have a formal opening or ending. It just drifts off, and I've seen that guests open up in the most remarkable of ways when they are on the show. A lot of guests say that, I don't know, they find something. Some of them I know, but some of them I don't know. I've met them for the first time. But we're talking about some things that are often deeply personal. And I don't want to prod. If I don't want to talk to them about, okay, how was your relationship with your wife? But then if I feel that, the conversation is going that way, if someone says that I didn't get along with my father, I will say, kyun? In some ways, just that one word question. Like, also a lot of things that they are never asked. Like, I've asked many guests, are you a good father? And they reflect, are you a good son? They break down on the show. It's been a great journey for me. Great journey. My fear is, it's like you go to some shows, you go prepared. Like, right, you go to a comedy show, there's going to be a certain kind of conversation. So I don't want people to come prepared to my show. I don't want people to come ready to tell a sob story. And I need to work on myself as an interviewer there to not sound too predictable. It's the same as when I was there as a reporter. So how should I open, what should my opening question be? How should I take it forward? Like there was one preparation which I did with Ayushmann Khurrana, where one of my colleagues, she went to his parents and he spoke about a punishment room. And I opened by saying, what if I tell you कि मुझे पता है कि आपके घर में एक punishment room है. And that look on his face was priceless. So yeah, I just want this, and also we didn't tie it down to any periodicity. That's very, very conscious as a decision. Like people keep saying, sir, agla kab aa hai. So people also know that it has no fixed periodicity. So, and also what happened was that after the Pankaj Tripathi interview came, and then Vishal Bhardwaj and the initial few ones, we didn't define the show. The audience started to define the show. Like the audience started saying, sir, ऐसा लगता है हम पीछे की सीट पे बैठे हैं और दो लोग बात कर रहे हैं, हम सुन रहे हैं बस. So that was, it's like the audiences had started to define our storytelling. कि सर जब आपको सुनते हैं तो कुछ सीखने को मिलता है, एक बेहतर इंसान बन जाते हैं, ऐसी चीजें देखते हैं, लगता है हमारे सामने हो रहा है. So from there came the tagline of the radio show, कहानियां जिनमें आप मिलते हैं खुद से. It came because a lot of people said that, कि लगता है हमारे साथ हो रहा है ये, लगता है ये तो मेरी कहानी है, So yeah, it's been a good journey. This year we couldn't shoot anything because of COVID, but now we'll be starting some shoots. We just shot one with Suresh Raina because he was very keen, and we were talking about him coming down, and so he drove down. And yeah. Also now a lot of guests, we request them to stay overnight, and they stay at my home, and that the pace, the languid nature of it just comes through in everything, and people notice. Like just yesterday somebody said कि sir वो तिग्मांशु धूलिया में आप जब breakfast हो रहा है आपने उनको क्यों नहीं पहले serve किया. And I realized that because I'm kind of a loner, so the niceties or the decorum of hosting others, my wife also said it after watching the show कि तुमने उनको क्यों नहीं पहले दिया. अब नहीं है मुझे ये तमीज, क्योंकि मैं खाता ही नहीं हूं ज्यादा लोगों के साथ, अकेला ही रहता हूं. But the viewer said it. आपने बोला कि sir, in our parts ये तो ठीक नहीं है sir. आपको पहले उनको serve करना चाहिए था. But I love that. The smallest of details they notice. So it started again as a beautiful coincidence, a new creative journey. But who knew that sitting out of my village, I would be able to do these conversations, which would be watched around the world. And like when Nawazuddin Siddiqui came, he said, आप बहुत जिद्दी हैं और ये आपकी जिद है कि आप बंबई छोड़ के आ गए, अब आप कह रहे हैं सब यहाँ पे आइए और मैं इसीलिए आया हूँ यहाँ और सारी दुनिया यहाँ पे आएगी. So I mean it's amazing. Like Tapsi Pannu is sitting on a गांव की पुलिया बाहर पे बैठी हैं या सुरेश रैना झूले पे बैठे हैं या so didn't realize that it would sort of become. And after that I realized that a lot of other film related interviews, people are getting the courage to do longer so a lot of film interviews now are like 1 hour, which was unthinkable earlier. So and they tell me also that many friends. So I think maybe it's given encouragement to longer form conversations because it's got the numbers, because guests so it's good.
Yeah, no, that's very evocative with me because that's a refrain that I have constantly also heard in my life, that this is idea brilliant, it will not work. Like before I did my blog India Uncut, if I was to pitch it to somebody through a platform or whatever, they'd laugh me out of the room, right? If I told someone I'm going to do a 3-hour interview podcast where I will take an obscure topic with a guest and talk about it and whatever, I would have laughed myself out of the room and just evolved this way and it happened to work. And I guess speculating one reason for that might be that while we contain multitudes and while we are a very large country where even the smallest niche actually has good absolute numbers, when people think of content or when they look at it from a marketing perspective, ki iska kya audience hai, then it becomes reductive. It becomes reductive to that most popular strand of a person's behavior and not necessarily to, the other kind of aspects of that nature. Though, if there is one complaint I have about the slow interview, quite honestly, it's that it's not long enough. Though I understand that I have the luxury of saying that from a perspective of audio because people listen to audio in a different way. You're listening at double speed while you're commuting or working out. So you can feed that sort of hunger for depth a little more. You're not stuck in front of a laptop looking at a screen. The other, the interesting thing also that I noticed about your show, which came out of a conversation I had with a recent guest, where she was sort of talking about how my approach towards the conversation I had with her was kind in her words and gave her the space to sort of, flesh out her thoughts. And my thinking was that no, she was the one who was kind because from the first moment of the interview, she trusted me completely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I saw that in your interview, for example, with Piyush Mishra, where initially you ask him just one question, ki kaisi gayi zindagi, something like that. And he just goes on for 45 minutes on that. And it's brilliant.
Yeah.
That whole flow where you don't have to do anything and there is that element of trust and, and it felt magical to me. And is there in so many of your sort of interviews where the form
says in one interview when in the second part where we sit on a puliya, he says, बहुत परिचित से लगते हो. मतलब, because I've not met him. I had not met him before that. And it seemed like we had met. And he said, कि बहुत परिचित से, तो मैंने कहा, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He said, no, it's a really good thing. They trust me. And like Anurag Kashyap had tweeted that, कि ये कैसे निकलवा लेते हो तुम? But, I think just being a good listener is a good starting point. And being an earnest and honest listener who's not looking at your words as a commodity, who's not wanting to make it a headline, who's not doing it for the traffic, who wants to just chronicle this for some years in the future when you might or might not want to say these things or all that. So yes, I feel that guests do have that. I mean, like with Sanjay Mishra, which was like amazing, another kind of interview, and there's laughter, but there's some tears also there, but we had never met. And when we spoke on the phone the day before the shoot, he said, मैं आ गया हूँ, I'm dying to come. अरे भाई मतलब मैं तो इतना वेट कर रहा हूँ आने का. So there's that thing also to, it's not that, these are guests who would wait to be on camera or wait to be any show. I think it's that moment, because you never have these conversations. In the world, they never have these conversations. And just that island of calm or comfort where they do not have to be fake. Like when we shot with Manoj Bajpayee, and I had never met him. And just before the shoot, I said that ये फिल्मी शो नहीं है. और so he had seen 1 or 2 episodes, I think. He said, I know Anurag for 27 years, but even watching your show, I came to know a few things which I never knew. And बीच में क्या हुआ कि he said, चाय पी लें? तो I said, हाँ. So he looked at the assistant. He said, अरे ये वो वाला शो है जिसमें चाय ला सकते हैं बीच में, लाओ. So they get it that it's not, like a studio, this, that, and the other. And from the beginning, we've had that someone bringing tea, all that, like the pauses. It's just a slice of life. It's nothing else.
And has it changed you doing the show? Because I realized that a lot of the questions that you ask also seem to have a personal resonance. For example, you were chatting, I think, with Vishal Bhardwaj, and you asked him about fatherhood. And he said that, जब बेटी पैदा होती है तो बाप भी पैदा होता है. And I remember the expression on your face as you're nodding at that point in time, and it's obviously resonant there. And a lot of your questions also seem to be almost as if you're asking yourself in a sense, so you've thought about these things, and equally you're asking the viewer, and it's all so intimate, that whole setting. Tell me a bit about that.
No, I think a lot of these questions, they sound very simple, but they set you off on a mental path that you've not gone down before. Just asking yourself, have you been a good son? It's a 5-word question that you've probably never asked yourself before. Are you a good father? So in asking them, I'm also asking the same things of myself. I'm also reflecting. And the searing honesty that my guests, reply with is something that I take away. And for sure, I mean, it's very personal. It's the idea of a lot of people speak about losing their loved ones or what happened, and it makes me afraid too. It makes the fear of losing our loved ones, and so it resonates, and the same thing happens with our viewers, because in a sense I'm asking them those questions, and they're reflecting as well. Because our guests are then coming out from their pedestal to show us their human side. And most of them are very, very wonderful, very simple people, actually. In real, they're very simple people. And that's what comes through. And because they're not putting on, it's not fake, it comes through. Yeah.
And, I'm not going to one by one ask you the questions that you ask your guests about, fatherhood and are you a good son and all of that. But I'll ask you a sort of a general question which encompasses all of that, and which is something I think about as well, is that, Kant, the philosopher, Immanuel Kant, not Amitabh Kant, Immanuel Kant used to speak about the categorical imperative that never treat other people as a means to an end, but as an end in themselves. And I think what we tend to do almost by default in our personal lives is that we are the center of the universe and everything revolves around us. And therefore, we do treat other people as if they are the means to an end. And there is this self-centeredness which we need to fight. And sometimes we can step out of our own minds and reflect, and we can become aware of what we are doing. And in those moments, we can give other people the respect they deserve as autonomous people and actually care about them and all of that. But otherwise, the rest of the time, we are in this reflexive mode where we are the center of the universe. Everything revolves around us. Everyone has their roles, rather than, we can't see them kind of beyond that. Now, you've sort of taken that step out more than most people, whether it's through your storytelling by inhabiting the skins of others, or whether it's just asking this question of all of your guests. You've had a sort of chance to reflect upon all of this yourself. What is that sort of journey like? In that sense, do you see yourself as having changed, let's say, even over the last 20 years? Is the Nilesh Mishra of 2020 very different from the Nilesh Mishra of, say, 1990 or even 2000?
Yes. One thing I've overcome very clearly is jealousy. And as creative people, that is the one thing that, we all contend with. When you see someone else write a great song or do a great story or win some journalism award. And I used to be insanely jealous until a certain point. And when you do that, the next emotion is that you question, you run them down, कि अरे वो तो फलाने का बेटा इसलिए किया है या कुछ कर लिया होगा. But I remember that it's when I was working in the Hindustan Times. I kind of remember that moment also. It was an amazing moment. And I was telling Swanand the other day in one episode of Slow Cafe, where I was at the traffic light in front of the Hindustan Times building on Kasturba Gandhi Marg. And Swanand's song Bavraman had just become a big hit. And I'm sure I felt jealous. Often you feel jealous because you ask yourself, why didn't you do this? I could have done this. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't this thought strike me? Why didn't this imagery, this use of words, which is so beautifully simple, why did it strike me? And I remember that it was as if it was a moment when everything melted in my mind. And I picked up the phone and I called Swanand. I had his number. And I said, I'm just calling just like that to say how beautifully you've written. I mean, it's an amazing piece of writing. And I wish I had written it. And that's the biggest compliment I can pay to you. And I meant all of that. And since then, when I went to Bombay, did an interview with him, and so we were reminiscing about all of that. खुल के तारीफ करना मुझे आता है, आ गया है. With my colleagues, with my peers, fellow writers, हिंदी में कहते हैं ना उन्मुक्त कंठ से, खुले गले से. So I think that has most definitely changed, and it happened somewhere toward the end of 2009, I think. Since then, I've been able to win over jealousy. Another thing is that I don't take fame seriously, and I don't mean that as a cliche at all. Fame doesn't attract me because the fame I have got is accidental. I never expected it. I was a reporter. I would have been writing, stories because I love journalism. I would have been a fairly good reporter, but this happened, and suddenly the written word was forgotten, and the voice became my identity. So the idea of being famous, I mean, I enjoy that idea. I like that idea, but I would rather be in a room, in the corner of a room in the shadows, watching people enjoy my work rather than be in the center of it. So being on camera or doing interviews or winning awards, if I was to die tomorrow morning, I'm fairly content with what I've achieved in life. And I would feel privileged that I've been able to do this much, because I mean, it's been so many lives all rolled into one. And to be able to do all of that, to be able to pursue something new and then succeed is a privilege, is a blessing. So I feel that definitely is something I notice about myself. Over the last 20 years, I could never have imagined being an entrepreneur. And that comes with its own mindset. If you're an individual person, you hold on to honesty, values. If you're an entrepreneur, often that might feel challenged. So, how do you remain honest there or retain the values there? Mr. K.S. Nair, who I mentioned earlier, who I count as one of my gurus, told me once that it's not just necessary to be honest, but to seem honest to the world. When the worst situation, like my auditor told me last year, that you are honest, but it would be a disaster if you seem dishonest after being so ruthlessly honest that you're. So there have been a lot of challenges there in running these startups, and has come at a big emotional cost. How do I keep the artist in me alive? Because that's been the big sacrifice I've had to pay. And along with that, because until a point, I was a lone wolf. I was the reporter who was going out there doing whatever. And suddenly now, when you're the boss, you can't. The worst boss is the one who competes with his team, or is jealous of his team, or doesn't support his team member to do what he was doing and to do better. And I think I love, for example, I love it when people in my team get credit, awards. I want to be in the background. I want them to remember that I did something for them. It's not entirely selfless that way. I want them to definitely remember. I want them to remember me well, even if they move on in their other conversation, in their careers. But I feel that amount of selflessness is something I've been able to achieve in my regular life. And there's an honesty that I've been able to hold on. See, my entire journey has been extremely unorthodox. Even now, when I'm on the fringes, I'm living in a village or a city far, far away from where the action is. But I know that I'm relevant. I know that whether it's storytelling, whether it's the slow interview, whether it's the whatever new things we keep, that gives me confidence. I know that the big media companies and I might not be working together because I don't reach out to them. But I know that tomorrow, if I write a film script, I can reach out to 5 production houses or directors. So I think I'm living my life on my own terms, and I'm still relevant. I'm in the mainstream. I think, and I rarely use the word I, but because this is my personal journey, but I think we have invented a new mainstream as we go along. Whether it's Gaon Connection, whether it's whatever we're doing with Slow, it's subversive. Thoda zid to hai. Like end of this year, we are coming out with a small OTT platform. Slow will become an OTT platform. Garib OTT, matlab we don't have the funding to whatever, but whatever, because we have a lot of content. We are a magnet for talent. Very, very accomplished people, talented people approach us. So we want to give it a platform. And our positioning is extremely clear. Decency is our business model. And if I look back at my entire journey, that's what it's been about. When the word slow defined my entire life, my entire journey, my journalism, my radio, my storytelling band, everything. What I've done in content and journalism. And in all of that, I think that's one thing I've obstinately clung on to, that I will not do anything for which I will repent or regret years later seeing my name against a song that might have, obscene lyrics or whatever, things like that. So that between 2011, 12, and now, being catapulted onto mass media, onto the center stage, so to say, of the creative universe, and still get away on your own terms, not having to conform, that has given me a lot of confidence. And I intend to continue building on that, retaining that, not losing that flavor, not losing the honesty that I really want to work with, and that integrity that I think not just me, but all communicators must have. But until a year and a half ago, so Gaon Connection was was the centerpiece of my life. And one day I reminded myself that I have no savings, and I'm a father of 5, and everything I earn, I use it to run Gaon Connection. So I said, okay, let me do some things which are seen as quote unquote commercial, but should have the same value system which everything else I do or with has. So if you're doing slow products, and if you're coming out with some 60 organic products, they should have the same promise of honesty for the customer, for the consumer, and should empower the farmer, just as Gaon Connection wants to. So that also comes from a place of graceful confidence, I would say. Very humble confidence, but for sure confidence. That we've carved out our own space. We've carved out a universe of people, not just us, who believe in this kind of content and who are out there in the millions. Because if this world is run by numbers, reach, traffic, well, then let's speak your same language. I'm not going to say that I am doing parallel cinema that 100 people will watch and you're mainstream and hence you're bad. I will fight you on the same pitch. I will fight mainstream with mainstream. And I will show you that, this stereotyping of audiences. The same person can watch an action film, a horror film, a Govinda film, and enjoy Honey Singh and listen to me. It can be the same person, because that's how we are. We like different things at different times, right? But it's us who have bracketed people, stereotyped audiences. And we are proving that wrong with everything we do. And we're doing things on our own terms. And that's what gives me confidence. I have fears also. My biggest fear is what will happen when this country doesn't want to listen to stories from me. Every artist comes with a shelf life. I think I'm privileged and blessed that I'm still being heard by people after 8, 9 years, a decade. That's a lifetime for any artist. Also, what will happen in the emerging world of artificial intelligence, where machines will come on board? But I do talk to scientists about it sometimes, and they say, well, they can never replace storytelling. They can never replace empathy or emotion. So how do we do storytelling in the era of artificial intelligence is now the next frontier that I want to open up.
I think, if I can quickly sort of butt in there, I would say that one thing artificial intelligence cannot do is that when it speaks about a married woman's love for the music of her childhood, it cannot bring up that image of that harmonium being kept in the attic. I think that's something that requires storytellers to kind of grasp that, that little bit of magic. But, I just want to say, I think your fear is completely unfounded. This is the one moment in this conversation where I'll disagree with you, because good stories, I think, last forever. And, I could speak to you for another 3 hours, quite frankly. I can take it slower than you can even imagine. But, we've not done any justice to talking about Gao Connection, which can be an episode on its own, and the slow movement and all of that. But, you've been so generous with your time and insights, and I'll have to sort of let you go now. Thank you so much again for, agreeing to come on the show, and again, being so trusting and open.
Thank you so much, Amit. It's been quite a delightful conversation.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, head on over to the show notes where I've put links to much of Nilesh's work. If you'd like to follow him on Twitter, you can do so at Nilesh Mishra. That's one word, NELESHMISRA. You can follow me at Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. You can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.